I was not happy that I was recognized, and that I was openly being called a legionnaire. I put on my best smile and took a seat at the table. Today, I am a member of the Adventurers Guild. I placed my bronze guild medallion on the table, showing my name and number, 13,393,919. Looking to use the tablet reader again, Icarus said, arching his eyebrow and looking suspiciously at my leg. I thought my limp was convincing, but maybe not to him. I was hoping to talk with Desdemona privately and spend some coin with Tarvin in the back, I replied to Icarus, eyeing Desdemona for a reply. What could you possibly want with me? Desdemona barked in an exasperated voice. Why did this woman hate me? Are you still a ship captain? I asked softly. The table was suddenly quiet. Icarus looked at the others playing cards, who stood and walked away, leaving just Icarus, Desdemona, and me at the table. Icarus rested his hands on the table and leaned forward. You are looking to get smuggled out of the Empire. I am that obvious, I chuckled, hopefully hiding my nervousness. I knew the Adventurers Guild hated the Empire, so I assumed I was safe in approaching them. Whether I could get what I wanted from them was another question. Myself or others and my horse. I requested with open hands toward Desdemona. Desdemona's eyes widened and she shook her head. 5 legionnaires would draw too much attention. My ship is already being watched closely. She waved me off, dismissing my request. Icarus looked just as doubtful. Actually, I am the only legionnaire. The others will be picked up along the coast east of here with my horse. The revelation did not convince them but made them more skeptical. Of course, they probably thought that if the others couldn't even enter the city, transporting them would be just as illicit. Icarus spoke slowly and carefully. Just because you are a guild member, legionnaire, doesn't mean we will accommodate your requests. I nodded. I understand. Would this be proper remuneration? I placed the major essence of clairvoyance on the table in front of Desdemona. Just seeing her shocked look made it more than worth it. It was an essence I would likely never use, so using it as barter was an acceptable loss. Desdemona picked it up and stared at it like it was the most precious diamond in the world. It was worth somewhere in the range of 50 to 500 gold. Being an affinity essence, it would be toward the upper range, I guessed. While Desdemona was enthralled, Icarus spoke. A valuable essence for sure. Still, what you are asking is dangerous. We are supposed to report any first citizen or legionnaire attempting to leave under suspicious circumstances. He broke into a friendly smile. Then again, such a situation has never happened in my tenure as the master of this guild hall. Well, there is more. I am actually looking to adventure under the guild in the Bhutan Caliphate, but am trying to get to the Grand Duchy of Mage first. I had a lopsided smile on my face at their incredulous looks. I could read maps and knew the difficulties of my route. Desdemona even put down the essence. Desdemona appeared incredulous. Grand Duchy of Mage. I have a sea ship, not a flying ship. To reach Mage, I would have to sail around the Bhutan Caliphate. A month and a week if the winds are with us. This would not cover my costs and crew for such a journey. She reluctantly held out the essence to return. There are flying ships? There are flying ships? I questioned longingly. Desdemona laughed at me. No, don't tell. Maybe during the golden age of the Titans, if you believe in the legends. Now, the only things that dominate the skies are dragons. And they don't like competition. I sighed, disappointed. I was hoping to use a portal to reach Mage, I revealed. Icarus was nodding and thinking. You could sail to Sanko in Esenhem then. The elves don't have portals, but there are displacement mages who can teleport your group for a significant fee. He nodded to the essence, giving me an estimate of the price to expect. From Sanko, you can port to the Esenhem capital of Arteria. Then you can portal from Arteria to Gramny. It won't be cheap for 5 people and a horse, though. The elves are also fairly strict about who they agree to port. He was clearly referencing the fact that I was a legionnaire, and Esenhem and the Telian Empire were at war. He continued, The Caliphate doesn't have any portals, and anyway, all non-orc adventurers need to register at the guild halls in either Kura, Harsif, Imaralel, or the capital of Bikar. I mentally stored that information, as I had planned to ask about how adventurers crossed borders during war. Desdemona studied me, trying to puzzle me out. There are plenty of dungeons elsewhere on the continent, but if you are hiding from the Empire, the Bhutan Caliphate is probably a good choice. That actually seemed like a good reason, so I just gave her a slight nod, letting her think she had figured me out. Icarus considered me and then gave me some advice. If that is the path you have chosen, then I suggest you register at an Adventurers Guild Hall in Essenham. While guild members are more accepted in the Bhutan Caliphate than in the Telian Empire, there is some culture shock. A number of orc adventurers operate within Essenham. It might be prudent to convince one to join you to help you navigate to the Bhutan Caliphate and avoid upsetting a warlord or cleric. While his advice was wise, I couldn't see Mavith working well with an orc. I nodded appreciatively at his advice anyway. My long-shot exit strategy seemed like it was going to work out. "Will you be willing to take me?" I said, smiling at Desdemona. "Not that simple." Desdemona smirked roguishly. "I need to put in a request to sail, and then my ship would be searched on the morning we pull anchor. Sometimes they send some truth-seekers to question the passengers. But with your guild medallion, you shouldn't be questioned, but no guarantees. How long till we sail, and how long to Sanko?" "My companions are waiting," I asked Captain Desdemona coolly. 2 days to ensure the appropriate people approve our departure, and 7 to 8 days to reach Sanko," Desdemona said professionally. She had switched from mocking glares to something akin to respect. At least, that was how I was interpreting her body language. "Excellent. Can I get a room here tonight?" I asked Icarus. He nodded. "No additional charge." He stood and left Desdemona and me at the table. Desdemona studied me intently and started to make me feel uncomfortable. "I think I will go and talk with Tarvan." "I will join you to get this appraised." She rolled the essence deftly across the backs of her fingers and over to her palm. Was it just me, or was she trying to impress me? The halfling was filling out some paperwork at his counter and looked up with his merchant's smile. It took him a moment before recognition flashed in his eyes. Was my disguise really not as great as I had thought? I attributed it to the fact that I was making eye contact. Desdemona pushed past me. "Tarvan, got an essence for appraisal." She placed the sphere down and spun it on the counter. Tarvan snatched it with deft hands. "Where did you come across a divination essence, girl?" Desdemona gave me no credit as the essence's original owner. "Barter for passage. I might consume it if the cost is reasonable," she said with a hint of hope in her voice. If she had the clairvoyance divination affinity, then her infatuation with the sphere made sense. Tarvan seemed indignant. "I log all transactions honestly." He reached under the counter and produced a scale, and I was immediately confused. "Isn't it just a major essence?" Tarvan scoffed. "Boy, every essence is different. Although essence spheres come in 3 sizes, their density and purity can vary greatly. It doesn't affect lesser essences much, but it can affect the price of major and apex essences by as much as 50%. I watched, fascinated, as he carefully weighed, measured, and used some type of etheric probe on the sphere over the next few minutes. Satisfied, he opened a logbook and scribbled in it. Desdemona had lost her patience. "And?" Tarvan was holding back a smile. 1.3. "Let me check the current exchange rates." He opened another book to reference, but Desdemona beat him to it. 400 gold, so 520 gold, she spat unhappily. Tarvan didn't acknowledge her while he did his own math. "Finished," he stated. 536 gold and 18 silver. Desdemona frowned and exited the back room. Tarvan turned to me. "While Desdemona is the shorebreakers captain, the guild owns the vessel. This is probably 5 years' pay for her. I had the distinct feeling I might have overpaid a little." Tarvan put his smile back on. "What can I do for you, Legionnaire?" "Just an adventurer now. Any healing potions?" I asked. "Not with the wars. If I did, there would be almost a 50% premium as well. Desdemona is only running her." He paused and looked me over. Where is she taking you? To the other continent. I didn't particularly appreciate how easily everyone was figuring out my intentions, but maybe my request was not so rare. The further you got from the Empire, the safer you were. Just away from the war, I stuck with the deserter theme, oblivion pills. Tarvan reached under the counter and retrieved a large jar of the pills. I purchased the entire jar of 100. With the transaction complete, he asked. Anything else? Some adventurer's armor, and one item for a scroll of revelation. Tarvan's eyes immediately brightened. He hopped off his stool, which brought him level with the counter, and quickly walked into his office, expecting me to follow. I had a number of items that still needed to be identified. I didn't want to put them all out there, as I was worried it might make a target. Since I was getting some adventurer leathers, I thought getting the Earth Drake bracers assessed would be advisable. As Tarvan sat at his desk and set up the revelation scroll, I placed the bracers on the desk with a gold coin. He was already aware of my dimensional space, so he was not surprised. Where do you find all your artifacts, Eric? He asked in a friendly tone as he took the pristine leather braces and the gold coin payment. Here and there, I hedged. The Adventurers Guild supposedly supervised all the dungeons in the Tellian Empire, in return for a non-interference policy with the Empire's affairs. The halfling looked at me, but then shrugged and continued his work. Tarvan activated the scroll. The runes glowed, and he read the results with his mastery of the runic language. Although I couldn't activate the scroll, I could make out parts of the runic script that flashed in the air. Finished. Tarvan picked up the bracers and licked them. It wasn't a gross lick, just a little taste. Earth Drake bracers. They disperse impacts across your entire body. Excellent defense against bludgeoning weapons, but if the bracers become too damaged from slashing attacks, the runes running through them will be disrupted, and they will become useless. Thank you. I took the bracers back, satisfied. The adventurer's armor? The armory is in the cellar. Talk to Draymond down there, Tarvan said helpfully. He seemed to be expecting me to ask for more, but I just stood and found the stairs down. The air smelled of oil and leather and had a metallic taste to it. Could you actually taste the air? The room opened up into a wide space. Weapon racks lined the walls, but there were actually very few weapons on the racks. A wiry man was hunched over a table and was stitching a leather pack. He looked up, his eyes too big for his face. He reached for a glass and took a long pull before speaking. What you need? His accent was thick, and I couldn't place it. Adventuring leathers, I responded, seeing an assortment of armor behind him. He pointed his thumb behind him. Find what you want, and I will add it up. Draymond ignored me and returned to his work. I started sorting through the leather armor on stands, tables, and chests. I started to appreciate my fitted Legion armor much more as I tried to piece together a set of leathers. The leggings were easy to find, and also a decent metal helm with padding. The boiled leather chest piece was much harder to fit. The selection was very limited. It wasn't even hardened with resin, like Legion armor. Maybe if we had time, I could be fitted for a new suit on our journey. I knew Mavith was going to want to move as quickly as possible to find his sister. The detour to Gramney was already going to delay us more than a week. But I wanted to leave word for Castile and the company and drop off my passengers. I ended up getting a chest piece that was closer to hide armor, as it was the only thing that fit well enough. When I placed everything on the table, Draymond muttered, 3 gold, 17 silver. I produced the coins as I considered it a fair price. Wearing slightly mismatched armor was going to gnaw on my soldier discipline. I scooped everything up and carried it upstairs. Icarus helped me check into a room on the 3rd floor with the innkeeper. It was a small room, and the smell reminded me of Murphy's oil soap. The mattress was stuffed with feathers. It was a bit musty but comfortable. I spent some time securing the room and coming up with a quick egress strategy through the lone window. I could use 2 air shields and cross the alley to the adjacent building's roof. I wasn't going to sleep well, knowing where I was. Before settling in for a short nap, I cleaned the blood compass and put another sample of Castile's blood into it. I was relieved to feel a weak pull, letting me know that she and the company were still alive. After resting in my room, I spent most of the night fitting the new leathers to my frame and breaking them in by practicing sword and spear forms. I remained in the room the entire day, and was surprised when Desdemona came and checked on me. Just checking to make sure you hadn't run off and I still have to sail your legionnaire ass out of the Empire. We can sail the morning after tomorrow, she said with a smirk. She was clearly flirting with me. Her abrupt change in disposition left me confused. I managed to quip back. Feel free to check on my legionnaire ass anytime. Instead of replying, her smirk grew, and she turned and strutted down the hallway. Judging by the sway of her hips, she was definitely flirting, or maybe she was indicating I should follow her. I slowly closed the door, trying to decipher the captain's intentions. Would it be cheating on Renna? Was I even in a relationship with Renna? There would be time to figure it out on the ship, as Maveth was my priority. Reluctantly, I took the blood compass out, cleaned it again, and added Renna's blood sample. Maybe if she was in the city, I could risk going to see her. Even though it would be a terrible idea, I was surprised but not shocked when her sample pulled in the same direction as Castile and had similar strength. They were together on the Empire's borders. Renna was a war mage now. I stayed in the room all day. Late in the evening, the city bell started to ring. Of course, the city would be attacked when I was about to leave. I dressed in my armor and rushed down to the common room. If I was correct, the Adventurers Guild was the safest place in the city. The invaders would leave it untouched as long as no adventurers joined the defense. Icarus was in the common room and looked over at me. The city is not under attack. The word is spreading through the city that the Emperor is dead. Was the Emperor dead? I stood stunned but impassive. My hand drifted to my pocket and I activated the compass. It still had a faint pull, so Castile was Olivia recently dead. My mind raced, and Icarus studied my reaction. You don't look surprised, Legionnaire, he stated appraisingly. The news is likely days old, he probed. He probably thought my flight was due to the Emperor's death. It felt like everything was snowballing and spinning out of my control. I am just stunned. What does this mean? Icarus eyed me again before speaking. It is just a rumor right now, spreading like fire through the city. If true, they will lock down the city to maintain order. Our conversation was cut short as Desdemona slammed the heavy entry door open, and before it slammed shut, I could see the chaos starting in the street. She had a tense energy and an angry tone. There is smoke coming from the palace. Her eyes locked on me. Is this your doing, Legionnaire? I could see why this woman was single. One moment she was hinting at a tryst, and the next moment she was accusing me of killing the Emperor and burning down the palace. I bit my tongue, holding back a nasty retort. No, I had nothing to do with it. Is this going to affect us sailing tomorrow? Desdemona barked a laugh. Are you daft? The palace is burning. I doubt they are going to let anyone leave the city now. At least, not until a new emperor sits in the palace. She collapsed heavily into a chair and put her feet up on the table, tilting precariously back in the chair. She locked her fingers behind her head. All we can do is wait. Megadeth and Ginger couldn't wait. I quickly came up with a plan in my head. That doesn't work for me. Would this help? I produced Count Cato's writ of unfettered passage and handed it to Icarus. I could have handed it to Desdemona, but she was currently rubbing me the wrong way. Icarus eyed the seal and read the parchment, surprise blossoming on his face. After a moment he said, "It might." Desdemona, irritated that no one was telling her what was written on the parchment, leaped to her feet, let the chair crash to the floor, and stomped across the room, taking the writ. She read it, confused, and looked at me. "Where did you get this?" You are working for Count Cato," she said accusingly. By her tone, I surmised Count Cato had a poor reputation with the Adventurers Guild. I decided to reveal more than I should, but I needed to get out of the city and pick up Maveth soon. No, I took it off the dead bodies of his men who were exploring the ruins of Caelora. They apparently ran afoul of a wyvern. Icarus and Desdemona made eye contact, and unspoken words passed between them. Icarus addressed me cautiously. What were they doing in Caelora? Last time you utilized our hall, you alluded to the rumors that a dungeon was found in Caelora. Are they true? At this point, I didn't see any harm in telling them the truth. Yes, there is a dungeon inside the City of Spectres. Almost impossible to reach safely, as the specters respawn. Respawn? Icarus echoed. He pursed his lips. He nodded. deciphering the odd word. I see, and the Emperor was aware of this dungeon. That is a violation of the Guild's agreement with the Empire, he said tersely. The air suddenly felt heavy, and I felt out of place. In a tight tone, Desdemona offered to Icarus, "If I move now, I might be able to use this to get out of the harbor. I can carry a message for you, Father. That is best. Most likely, if we use any of the message senders, word would get out that we know for certain," Icarus said in agreement. It seemed whatever I did, I always seemed to stir shit up. What are the implications of the shimmering labyrinth dungeon being revealed? Icarus considered me before explaining. Our Tellian charter grants us administration of all dungeons within the Empire. The first citizens have a right to purchase retrieved artifacts that our members intend to sell. By keeping a new dungeon secret, we are entitled to a lessening of certain restrictions upon our guild operations. Unfortunately, I am not in a strong position to negotiate. He patted his small beer belly with a smirk. Desdemona will get word to our assembly, and they will send someone with a stronger hand. I could tell he was hinting at someone more powerful. "Do you object?" he asked directly. "No, my bridges are already burned with the Empire," I replied candidly. This got an approving look from Desdemona. I had already decided to abandon the Empire, so this did not affect me. It looked like it would only negatively affect the new Emperor and first citizens, which was fine with me. "Are we leaving now?" I asked Desdemona with a crooked smile. She rolled her eyes and barked an order at me. "Yes, grab your things, Legionnaire. We will head to the Shorebreaker immediately. I am ready to go now." I held my smile. I was wearing my new adventurer's armor, and the Magebane blade hung on my hip. Although the hilt was intricate, I figured all the other blades I owned could be recognized. Desdemona huffed and rushed into her room, returning with a leather pack that I assumed was her go-bag. She was about to shoulder it, but instead tossed it hard at me to carry, not hiding her teasing smirk. "Follow me, Legionnaire. You know if you keep calling me Legionnaire, someone might believe you and detain me," I voiced humorously. Desdemona stopped and spun, walking to get face to face. In a challenging tone, she snapped at me. "Do you think I am an idiot? Say no. Eric, say no." "Well, I don't know you well enough to make that judgment," Icarus coughed, amused. Desdemona's bronzed face started to darken as she flushed in a torrent of emotions. She had to look up as she was more than a head shorter than me. Her eyes were ablaze as she scowled up at me. Her fingers stabbed into my armor repeatedly as she talked. "The only stupid one here is you." She then spun and stormed out. I whispered so only Icarus could hear. That was not a very good comeback. Icarus laughed again. "Don't let her get too far ahead, Eric. She has a tough exterior, but I think she actually likes you." He winked and indicated I should go with a gesture. Did he just give me permission to seduce his daughter, or tell me that his daughter was seducing me? I adjusted the straps on her pack before shouldering it as I moved to catch up to her. She had slowed, and I was soon walking next to her. She walked confidently and didn't speak as we wove through the city streets toward the docks. It looked like every city guard had emptied into the streets to keep order. In the distance, I could see a line of blue-gray smoke rising from the palace. I wondered if that was the archives burning. Maybe the blood sample was being burned at this very moment. I rechecked the compass in my pocket, reassuring myself that Castile was alive. If she was dead, I probably would not head to Gramney. My course was set for the moment anyway. As we stepped onto the time-worn, salt-crusted stone piers, dozens of large ships were actively trying to make ready to sail, but soldiers, legionnaires, magistrates, and city guards were barking warnings to stand down. It was complete chaos. Desdemona stormed up the gangplank of her modest ship. "Isaac, prepare to sail." She barked at a sailor. He nodded and started yelling orders, spurring a flurry of sailors to action. A desperate man in white magistrate robes barked at Desdemona from the pier. "Captain, all ships are being held for 3 days. Please." Desdemona spun and marched heavily down the ramp to the magistrate. His 2 city guardsmen reached for their weapons. "Magistrate Jochen, Count Cassius Cato has chartered my ship for an urgent mission. We are to get to his estate and secure it." The magistrate took the writ she slapped in his hand and read it. His mind seemed to be working. "How are you going to get to Count Cato's estate by ship?" he asked skeptically. after reading the writ and confirming the Count's crest. Desdemona caught herself but snatched back the writ. "We are getting more men to guard his citadel." Most of his men were sent to the warfront. She obviously had no idea which city housed Cato's citadel, and neither did I. The magistrate seemed to weigh his options. "If you can wait 4 hours, we can have a message sent to the Count to confirm." "You have 30 minutes, she said confidently. She turned her back on the magistrate and jogged back up the ramp. I cocked my eyebrow as she passed, and her eyes gave me a fiery warning not to question her intelligence after the poorly thought-out ploy. I heard her whisper to Isaac, who I assumed was her first mate. "Cast lines in 10 minutes. I moved to the center of the deck as men raced about in a dance, preparing the rigging. Magistrate Jochen was left stunned. He looked young to be a magistrate, maybe in his early 20s. After getting over his shock, he sent one of his guards off at a run. Desdemona joined Isaac in giving orders, and as she passed me, she said, "I hope Cato is not in the city and easily found, or this could be a very short trip." I kept having to move out of the way, and eventually found an unobtrusive spot all the way in the stern. The ship was not large, maybe 60 feet bow to stern and 20 feet in width. I watched the stone docks as the magistrate fumbled with what to do. It was clear we were not waiting on him. He raced to talk with other magistrates, but everyone was occupied arguing with other captains in the chaos. When we cast lines, we were not the first. Others were trying to get past the breakers into the mouth of the river to join the current. Tall towers guarded the harbor with massive ballistae on top. All were manned, but none of them fired as the small parade of daring ships left the harbor. Desdemona came to me, breathless, sweat glistening on her brow from having worked with her crew to make sail as quickly as possible. If we had waited till night, they probably would have stationed men on the decks of every ship. "You got lucky. I don't take no for an answer," she said with a flirtatious smirk. I could see why Desdemona was a captain. There was something attractive about a woman with a commanding aura and confidence in her element. She didn't stay near me as she walked the deck and navigated around the other ships fleeing the capital. It was still over a mile in brackish water to reach the sea. Desdemona tossed her jacket away, revealing her muscular, tan frame under a thin blouse and leather vest. She moved with a practiced grace across the deck, giving sharp orders. When she passed close to me, I asked, "Can I help?" She took a moment to look me up and down doubtfully. "You should remove your armor. If you fall overboard, you will likely drown trying to swim in that." "Have you ever sailed before?" "No, this is actually my first time on a sailing ship," I replied. "But I am willing to learn. First time? I will be sure to break you slowly. Wait till we hit the open water and see if you still want to help then." She grinned mischievously at me as she prepared the shorebreaker to raise full sail. As soon as the river pulled the ship into the sea, it began to rock with the waves. Desdemona kept eyeing me, but I never stumbled once. My stomach did churn a bit, but I bit down and contracted my abs to counter the seasickness. Every time she looked at me, I just smiled back. The ship was being tossed roughly, and I think the courser's purpose was to try and get me nauseous. Desdemona finally gave up and gave a string of commands. "Hoist the sails. Pickle, to the nest. Lasho, calm the waters. Vadoma, funnel the wind to the sails." A choreographed action took place, and the sails dropped and snapped to attention in the wind. A man scrambled up to the crow's nest. 2 sailors, who I hadn't realized were mages, started weaving spell forms. The water immediately around the ship calmed, and the mast strained under a stronger wind as the shorebreaker started cutting through the water much faster, leaving behind the other ships escaping the capital. With the deck steady and the ship under speed, I complimented Desdemona. "A fine ship and crew." She brushed it off, but I think she blushed. It was hard to see under her tan skin. "They are. Where are we picking up the others?" "Stay close to the coast. He has a spyglass, and when he sees the Adventurers Guild flag on your ship, he will reveal himself on shore," I explained. She shrugged. "My cabin is the first door through there," she said, pointing. "Is that where I am staying?" I asked innocently. "No, put my pack in there," she ordered. Even though her voice was harsh, I could see the twinkle in her eye. I entered the foredeck and found her captain's cabin. It had the sickly sweet scent of perfume and just one large hammock. I tossed the pack on the large, polished table with 2 fixed benches, which provided comfortable seating for 4. It was Spartan except for the closets, which I couldn't resist and peeked into. They were packed with clothes, and it was from there that the sickly sweet smell was coming. Returning to the deck, I had someone show me my cabin. My tiny cabin was simple: a hammock, a desk, and a single chest. I sat at the desk on a chair fixed to the floor. I cleaned the compass, sterilized it, and added Maveth's sample. I took a deep breath and activated it. We had only been separated for 2 days, but the wilds were dangerous. A steady pull eased my mind, and I returned to the deck. I leaned on the rail and watched the shore for Maveth. I tried to count the crew as a distraction, and there were either 19 or 20 above deck, not including Desdemona. There were more below decks because I could smell dinner being prepared and hear frequent, varied shouts from below. We sailed for nearly 7 hours, and I was getting worried the sun might set and make it hard to spot Maveth as the compass pull grew stronger. Fortunately, before dusk, Pickle called down from the crow's nest. "Big bloke on shore with a horse." Desdemona looked at me and I nodded. "Thought you said there were 5 passengers besides yourself." Everything had been so rushed that I hadn't had time to prepare for my passengers to be removed. Now, I decided it was best to hold them until we reached Gramney. "Yeah." I pretended to look at the shore and thought I could make out Maveth. "It doesn't look like they will be joining us." Desdemona shrugged. "No refunds." The ship made anchor just 50 yards offshore, and the waves were being calmed by etheric magic. Lasha went with us in the rowboat to calm the waters. Maveth had a huge grin on his face as I jumped off the bow of the small boat into the breakers, and we clasped each other's wrists. I asked, "Any trouble?" He shook his head no. Getting Ginger into the boat only took a pair of apples to bribe her. I had been worried about getting her on deck, but didn't need to worry, as there was a ramp on winches that led to the ship's hold on the port side. The shorebreaker frequently took on all different types of cargo, including livestock. The rear hold had a slight ammonia scent, coarse floorboards, and 8 individual stalls. I spent some time getting Ginger comfortable and settled, but she seemed familiar with water transport. Maveth had fed her already, and 2 young deckhands assured me they would take exceptional care of her. I handed them each a silver to make sure. When I finally got back on deck, Desdemona already had the shorebreaker under sail and was talking animatedly with Maveth, her bright white teeth in a constant smile. They seemed to be getting along, and I just hoped Maveth didn't say too much. Seeing me, Maveth said, "Eric, Captain Desdemona is an avid fan of checkers. She thinks she can best me 3 out of 5 games after dinner while we discuss my travels from Stone Mountain Island." I had thought Desdemona was flirting with me, but maybe that was just her way of being friendly. Perhaps I had misread the situation entirely, as I was often prone to do with women. I was probably never going to see Renna again, but I had some hope we might reunite. "I'm going to get some rest." I waved to my friend, wishing him the best of luck with Desdemona. As I turned, did she look disappointed? I returned to my cabin, secured the door, and took out the Dreamscape amulet. Setting it loosely in my grasp, I entered the Dreamscape. As I settled into the Dreamscape, Constantine rushed to me. "Ready to resume your training?" I wasn't sure if this was my subconscious missing the old man or him being his regular annoying self. A slight pain of loss lingered, as I didn't know if he still lived. How involved had he been in the plot? I wish I had taken a sample of his blood during hound training. Not knowing would nag at me and make me anxious at every shadow, expecting him to step out. "Not tonight, Constantine. I have to study some Elvish." I pointed at Scholar Fabian. Constantine had a sour expression on his face. "What good do you think it will do to talk with your enemies if you can't defend yourself from their blades?" He spat on the ground and walked away. Scholar Fabian smiled. "Don't worry, he will cool down after a time. You need my instruction." I rarely conversed with Fabian in the Dreamscape, but he seemed eager to help. Unfortunately, the extent of Scholar Fabian's knowledge was limited to my own. The good news was that during my time with him, we spent hours reviewing the Elvish language and script. I had spent long sessions with the scholar working on my pronunciation and practicing with verb tenses in Kaelora. I exited the Dreamscape every 2 hours to check on our ship, but only pitch-black night and the rush of water greeted me when I looked through the small porthole. From the height of the porthole, I thought it was made to piss out of. At least, That was what I used it for. While working on Elvish pronunciation, I walked the deck during the day. The shorebreaker was rolling a bit with the waves, and I assumed the Mage had exhausted his ether. Only a handful of crew dressed in thin, loose garments were on the deck, and they ignored me after giving me curt nods. I spent an hour with Ginger, and she seemed to be doing well. After an apple she was doing well. I suspected this was not her first time on a ship, as legionnaires frequently used barges in the Empire. When I returned above deck, Desdemona had taken the helm. She didn't even acknowledge me, so I stripped down to work bare-chested on my sword forms with the black blade. My blade whistled through the air as I chained multiple movements together. I was preening a bit, and pushing myself to work up a good sweat in the cool morning sea air. There were 2 middle-aged female members of the crew who appreciated the show, and more than a few of the male sailors as well. I caught Desdemona sneak her own glances, and then pulled the Mage who calmed the waters to her to talk. Shortly after their conversation, the ship seemed to be surging and falling with the waves. It was a childish attempt to disrupt my practice, but I was more concerned for Ginger. I checked on her before continuing, and used the unstable deck to train. The ship riding the swells had roused Maveth as well. "Late night?" I asked my friend. "Very," he huffed, licking his lips. "Desdemona pushed me hard and taught me some things." Maveth started to strip as well to join me in my practice before continuing. She won 5 of our 13 games, and then taught me how to play backgammon. It took a little explanation before I understood the unfamiliar word they used for backgammon. Maveth started to stretch, and I was happy to see the shorebreaker had returned to cutting evenly through the water instead of riding the waves. "Do you want to practice, Maveth?" I asked, thinking we could give the crew a good show. Maveth sucked his teeth, thinking. "No air discs?" he questioned softly. "It never took me long to win when I used them." "Agreed," I said immediately, and began rapping my blade. Maveth went to retrieve his hammer, and soon we were sparring on the deck. Maveth was faster than I remembered, but it didn't matter, as my own speed gains had far surpassed his increases. With my small buckler, I could deflect his hammer before it built up speed and get inside his guard. I was even ready for his offhand punches and low kicks. We got lost in the physical exercise, and soon both of us were coated in sweat. My mop of black hair was plastered to my scalp while Maveth's profuse sweat rained down on the deck with each impact. We both understood this was practice and exercise more than a test of our skills. Still, I used a few openings to slap Maveth's ass with the flat of my blade. I was trying to impress Desdemona, and caught her watching more than once. But maybe she had eyes for Maveth. When I deflected a heavy swing of the runic hammer into the deck, the boards cracked before the hammer rebounded. Desdemona barked angrily. "Don't destroy my ship, Legionnaire." Maveth immediately defended me. "It was my hammer that did the damage, D." He was breathing heavily and bowed slightly toward the fast-approaching captain. "I will compensate you for any damage. The Legionnaire was the one who forced your hammer into the deck with a clumsy parry," she said hotly, as she finally reached us. "All brute strength and no finesse. Do you think you are a better match for me?" I said with a wide grin. The truth was that I had switched my style to forceful and direct combat with Maveth. I was looking for exercise and trying to match the Goliath's strength. I was a much better swordsman than I appeared to the crew, and Desdemona should have realized that if she had paid attention when I practiced my sword forms. "You are probably too exhausted from your practice with Maveth Legionnaire," she remarked, stepping back to assess me. The thing was, I might have been sweating profusely, but I was not winded, nor did I feel tired. Eric actually has amazing endurance and can go forever. I don't think I have ever met his match, Maveth noted as his breathing started to settle. Desdemona cocked her eyebrow. "Thanks, Maveth, but I can speak for myself. I would gladly give you a lesson if you want some exercise and to sharpen your skills." My tone was playful, and her eyes understood the implication. The crew around us had paused to watch our interaction, clearly hoping to see their captain in action. I think she was weighing her chances. She finally said, "First to 3 strikes wins, agreed. Maveth can officiate." Maveth vehemently shook his head, "No going." "Fine. Your first mate, Isaac, then." Isaac turned over the helm to another and eagerly joined the entertainment on the main deck. Desdemona drew her long, thin-bladed rapier with a smaller guard than normal. With her offhand, she drew a stiletto. She hadn't struck me as a two-weapon fighter, but her eyes brimmed with confidence. She started to limber up and asked, "Spell forms." I smirked. "I am not telling you what my spell forms are." "No, you dolt. Are they allowed in our contest?" I could see her crew starting to make wagers on the outcome, eager for some good amusement. "It wouldn't be a fair contest then. You wouldn't stand a chance," I replied confidently. "Are you going to wrap your weapons? Spell forms are allowed then." She beamed widely. "Don't worry if I stab you a little. Bodoma can heal you." Instead of playing into her overconfidence, I smiled, pulled the tacky wrapping off my black blade, and made Corvus' runic dagger appear in my offhand. I was sure Tarvin had already told Desdemona about my dimensional space, but judging by her surprised look, maybe not. She stepped back, reassessing my two blades and me. "That is a different blade than the one you carried on deck in Telha." Her eyes were focused on the runic, dungeon-forged dagger. I probably should have had it identified before using it in combat. It had no remarkable effect during my fight with Corvus, but then again, I didn't give him much of a chance. "Mavaeth was carrying it for me," I replied unflinchingly. His pack had certainly been large enough to conceal the blade. She narrowed her eyes but didn't contradict me. I was interested to see what her spell forms were. It would be excellent practice for me to react to an unknown factor. Desdemona didn't wait for an announcement to start, and instead rushed me. I had trouble following her movement as she seemed to blur, and I guessed it was her spell form. As she closed in, I focused and reacted to her movements, but she seemed to have 4 arms instead of 2. Maybe it was an illusion, but it did not matter. I managed to block all 4 attacks and separate. Steel clanged twice in the air as she moved past me. She turned to face me quickly, clearly angry that her attack had not connected. Her chest was heaving from the effort, and I almost told her she needed to work on her conditioning, but I bit my tongue. Her crew was also visibly shocked that their captain had missed all her strikes. Maveth was the only one clapping at the performance, impressed by what he had just seen. The seeds of doubt had been planted in her mind. Interesting spell form. What was it? I asked, grinning. "Perhaps you have something else you want to try?" I relaxed my stance a little as I studied her. I guessed that she was slightly older than me and had grown up in the Adventurers Guild, so she had to have a lot of experience. "Illusionary feint," she finally said. "It projects multiple attacks, and I can watch my opponent and then choose which one to utilize." "Impressive," Maveth said aloud. "If I had not blocked all 4, you would have adjusted to the 2 successful attacks." She nodded slowly. "I agree with Maveth. Impressive. What else can you do? Or if that is all you have, you keep using it." I caught Isaac and Vodomas smirking out of the corner of my eye. Desdemona's chest heaved with adrenaline, and she didn't respond. Her jaw tightened and she rushed me again. This time, I was forced back after blocking 4 attacks twice in a row as she chained her ability in an attempt to catch me off guard. It was taxing even for my quickness, and I retreated 4 steps as I dealt with all her attacks. It was curious how heavily she was breathing after the attack, and I pieced it together. She was, in fact, making all 4 attacks somehow, or at least, she was using the energy to make all 4 attacks. The small woman didn't look happy. I hadn't even used a single spell form. Before consuming all the quickness essences, I probably wouldn't have been able to keep up with her. And if she were a little faster, things could be playing out very differently. After she caught her breath, she made another attempt, and then another. This was actually excellent training for me, and I was going to let her continue. But she scored a cut on my thigh on the 3rd sequence. She had extended her illusion on larger vectors, and I couldn't get the runic dagger to block the 4th attack in one sequence. A sweaty mess. She grinned like a Cheshire cat. Isaac, realizing his captain had scored, announced it. D1. Eric 0. At least he was using my name and not calling me Legionnaire. Having some pride I didn't plan to lose. The next rush found Desdemona tripping over the invisible air shield and her ass receiving the flat of my black blade like Maveth had earlier. She gave me a satisfying yip at the strike and quickly rolled away. She was on her feet in a blink, trying to puzzle out what the hell just happened. Exasperated, I turned to Isaac and raised my hands questioningly. He finally announced, D1. Eric 1. I nodded my thanks. Desdemona looked to Mavaith for help, as she hadn't been able to figure out what I had done. Mavaith started to speak. But my harsh look silenced him. The captain was clearly tired from using her spell form. It wasn't either exhaustion but physical exhaustion. In the next exchange, I didn't even have to use an air shield to leave a cut on her bicep with the runic dagger. Isaac reluctantly announced, D1, Eric 2. I could tell who among the crew had bet on me by their happy faces, but most looked downcast, about to lose their coin. You are no longer bleeding, Desdemona noted. She was clearly stalling for time to recover. I looked down at my bloody leggings. Yeah, it looks like it. You did ruin these pants. If I win, will you sew them for me? The look in her eyes told me she knew she was overmatched. My brutish, direct attacks against Mavaith were gone, and I was now agile and defensive. If I were fighting myself, I would have my doubts as well. My third point was an elbow to Desdemona's head. I had actually been trying to grapple with her, but she was like a slippery eel in close quarters. It was either an elbow to her head or her stiletto in my kidney. Note to self: do not try to subdue a woman to impress her when she can stab you with a 12-inch blade. Isaac called me the victor and Mavaith clapped loudly. The crew exchanged coins and slowly returned to work. Mavaith, lunch, and a game of backgammon. Desdemona asked the Goliath, clearly exhausted. Her sweaty clothes clung to her short frame. By the look in her eyes, I could tell she was going to press my friend for all my secrets in the hope of coming out on top next time. As Mavaith happily followed Desdemona to her cabin, I thought to myself that she didn't have to try this hard to be on top. Constantine sat cleaning his weapons deep in the rocky crevice where they had set their lookout. It was unnecessary, but it gave him something to do while he waited and mourned. He was still reeling from when Cornelius had revealed Eric's death to him. The blood compass had no pull on Cornelius' sample. The foolish boy had gotten himself killed, and it hurt more than it should have. He had mentored dozens of young men who had died. So why did this feel different, more painful? He compartmentalized his feelings and focused on his responsibilities. He had been pulled from Castile's company to assist the greatly undermanned hounds. The Emperor planned to portal behind the Barteradian army and launch an attack from the rear. He had been in among the first men through the portal and was paired with Western Hound, one of Centurion Sergius' immediate subordinates, Gracilis. This assignment suited him. If Antonia's plan was enacted, he would prefer to be as far away from the Emperor as possible when betrayal occurred. Looking over at Gracilis, he shook his head. He hadn't wanted to be paired with anyone but had no choice. At least Gracilis was competent. After exiting the portal, they moved undetected 4 miles southwest into the hills overlooking the Barteradian army. Now, they watched the edge of the enemy camp from a mile away, ready to report any change. Gracilis was currently watching with the spyglass they shared. Any change? Constantine asked in a bored tone. Just 2 mages sneaking off into the woods for a quick romp. The woman isn't too bad looking if you want to watch. Gracilis turned and offered the spyglass to Constantine. How far outside of camp? Could we catch them unawares? Constantine asked, sheathing his blade. It had been months since he had slain an undead with his weapon, and its hunger gnawed on him after its gluttonous time in Caelora. No, there are sentries. 2, in fact, and they are enjoying the show from a large beech tree, Gracilis said with a chuckle. It shouldn't be long now. Dawn is coming, Constantine grunted and stood. Hopefully the army would all be through the portal by now. He wondered if Xina would make her attempt on the Emperor's life during the battle. He might depart the field and return to the safety of his palace if this battle was won. Constantine moved to lie with Gracilis on the ground. In front of him was the message book, and Constantine read the last few messages. Centurion Sergius relied too heavily on these artifacts. The last 2 pages had dozens of shorthand notes. Most appeared to be the positioning of various hounds and the progress of the Emperor's army. He had to admit that knowing events in essentially real time was useful. He was about to ask for a translation of the shorthand when Gracilis hissed. The alarm just sounded, as if to echo his statement. Short horn bursts echoed in the hills. Griffins took flight, one at a time, and raced in the direction of the Tellian portal. This is going to get messy, Constantine rasped, worried about his companions. He might work for Antonia, but his loyalty was to Castile as much as it could be. She was as close to a genuine leader as you could get among the mage ranks and more dependable than any first citizen he had known. The pair remained prone on their bellies as they watched the army stir over the next hours and begin to march. It was an impressive sight and very orderly for the amalgamation of different troops. Constantine quickly needed clarification on what he was seeing. Why are they committing all their forces to engage the emperor? Gracilis checked his book before answering. Tiberius has not marched yet. They probably think the army appearing behind them is Tiberius and Octavian's forces. Why are Octavian's provincial forces with Tiberius? Constantine asked, confused. He was sensing something in the air, a danger, and not that of the Barteradian army about to be crushed between the emperor's and Tiberius' armies. Gracilis' slow response was suspicious. Don't know. I am just reading what my centurion is writing. Constantine was already on guard as Gracilis rolled into him and attempted to stab him. Constantine's visor-like grip held the hound's wrist at bay, but he was not prepared for the short skinning knife that stabbed a half-dozen times into his abdomen before he could distance himself and get on his feet deeper in the crevice. The wounds were not mortal, but a familiar paralysis started to spread from Constantine's gut. Gracilis didn't give Constantine a chance to draw his blade and tackled him. Gracilis just needed to restrain him long enough for the poison to paralyze Constantine. Just let it go, old man, Gracilis hissed. Events are in motion and you are not going to be part of them. Don't make your trip to Pluto's realm more painful than it needs to be. You are fucking dead, Constantine said, with spittle spraying from his mouth as he pushed the pain aside. Gracilis was not aware that Constantine had dosed himself with the paralytic for years. He wasn't immune but could remain somewhat functional. He slowly felt Gracilis overpowering him. He pushed all his ether into flinging a stone into Gracilis's wide-open eye. The impact surprised Gracilis, damaging his eye, and he briefly relaxed his hold on Constantine. Constantine took full advantage, pulling Gracilis toward him and biting hard on his nose. His teeth sank deep, and metallic blood filled his mouth as he yanked his head back and forth. The crunching cartilage gave way, and Constantine spat the bloody nose into Gracilis' good eye. Gracilis kicked away and drew his sword in one motion. His ruined nose gushed blood, and it sprayed on his strong exhales. Constantine was quicker, and his runic blade drove up into his opponent's sternum. Unfortunately, Constantine was still vulnerable, even though his enemy was as good as dead. Gracilis' blade bit deep into Constantine's arm, cutting through the armor to the bone. The bone was probably broken as well. The violent exchange only lasted 10 heartbeats, but it took its toll on both men. Constantine grunted, ignoring the pain as life flowed out of the hound down his blade. The blood rushed down the blade's length and soaked his hand. The weight of Gracilis slowly became too much, and Constantine collapsed to his right. Constantine tried to suck oxygen, but the paralytic only allowed for short, forced breaths. He worked his only lesser healing potion to his lips, cursing Gracilis and Centurion Sergius. He calmed as best he could and fumbled to wrap his arm so he would not bleed out, as the potion would not be enough for his extensive injuries. He had lost a lot of blood and could barely move under the effects of the poison. Constantine painfully dug out his canteen and searched Gracilis for a lesser healing potion. He forced the water down, angry that Gracilis only had a pair of lesser stamina potions in his belt and nothing in his small pack. The paralytic was making movement too difficult, so he crawled deep into the crevice. Morning had arrived, and the army in the distance was marching. All he could do was watch. Soon, his fatigue and blood loss caused him to fade into unwanted sleep. When he woke, it was midday, and the army was gone. He focused the spyglass and saw the camp was overrun with Tellian soldiers cutting down the camp followers. A few Barteradians were being raped, and the screams drifted to him even a mile away. Constantine sucked his canteen dry, and then drank the one in Gracilis' pack. The effects of the paralytic had passed, but he was still groggy. He turned to studying the message book. Dozens of messages had been written since Gracilis had tried to kill him, but he couldn't puzzle out the shorthand cipher. He started to pack what he could and stage the body to appear as though Gracilis had been surprised by the Barteradians. It might not make a difference if there was a civil war among the hounds. He sensed this was more than power play by Centurion Sergius, though. He couldn't use his left arm as the healing was incomplete, and the bone was still broken. What treachery was happening? What had happened in the hours he had been passed out? Where should he go? He had 10 days of food. He painfully shouldered his hound pack with one arm and moved toward the battle. 3 hours later, Constantine was on a bluff overlooking hundreds of dead as carrion raptors feasted. If he had been in charge, this was where he would have observed the battle. He was kneeling over the headless body of Cornelius. "You taught us always to be prepared for anyone to betray us, Cornelius. Looks like you got too old and forgot your own advice." The body had been stripped, but Constantine searched him anyway. The tracks in the earth told him 2 hounds had killed Cornelius and taken his head. Dragon shit. It meant he would be subjected to a necromancer, and all the conspirators would be revealed. It looked like Centurion Sergius had figured out the conspiracy and sided with the emperor. Most likely Antonia was dead, but should he try to confirm? He had no love for the scheming woman. Antonia was likely in the capital, but getting there was going to be a chore with a broken arm. He sighed, realizing that Castile and Zina must also be dead by now. He tried to convince himself that he would be dead too if he had stayed with Castile, but that didn't ease his guilt. He shambled down to the battlefield and slowly exchanged his hound gear for legionnaire gear. At least with this he could get his arm healed without drawing the attention of the traitorous hounds. He found an exhausted healing mage further into the bloody field. "Can you get the bone set and healed at least?" Constantine winced as he moved his arm in the sling. The man sighed but gave a short nod, and he sweated through the healing. The pain eroded away, and Constantine flexed his arm. "Most of the muscle is repaired as well," the mage rasped, collapsing to the ground. Constantine didn't even thank him as he moved in the direction the battle had gone. He found an Imperial legionnaire waiting for healing on a rock. His left arm was missing from the elbow down. It would take a tremendous amount of ether to regenerate the limb. Constantine sat heavily next to him. What news of the victory and the emperor? The man coughed a laugh and spat blood. His injuries extended beyond the arm apparently. Victory, yes. The emperor took all the cavalry he could muster to run down the remnants of the Barturadian forces. Constantine nodded, but didn't know how to ask if the emperor had been betrayed, or if it was common knowledge that the East and West hounds were warring behind the scenes. Instead, he handed the Imperial legionnaire a canteen he had looted. The man took it as they watched a few soldiers run around the field to find the living and keep them so. When the legionnaire passed out, Constantine made him comfortable, as he was likely to die without healing. Constantine eventually joined the search for the living as he looked for men he knew. He recognized a few faces among the dead, but only recalled a handful of names. When he found Calm's body, he knelt, closed the man's eyes, and said a short blessing on the body. He couldn't find any other members of the company among the dead, but it was a massive battlefield that had shifted during the fight. A rider wearing Octavian's colors came racing on horseback through the field. He repeated the same message over and over. "The Barturadians have killed the emperor. Duke Octavian has avenged him." The few men around were stunned by the news. Constantine didn't buy it for 1 second. The emperor had too many powerful mages and Imperial legionnaires guarding his person. He started to move in the direction the rider had come from, but slipped into the woodlands for cover. It took time to reach the site of the second battle. He observed from a safe distance. It was clearly a mage battle. The scent of ozone was strong, and many trees were still burning. Octavian's men were stripping the bodies of Imperial legionnaires and mages. One Imperial legionnaire started to stand, and 2 of Octavian's men cut him down. Then he saw Hercule and Sergius walking among the dead and cataloging them. Sergius had betrayed both Antonia and the emperor. Constantine ground his teeth, but he was in no position for revenge. He faded back into the woods, the fate of his company unknown. He waited until night, when the men cleared the field. Then he walked among the dead. With the hound goggles, it was not difficult to find High Mage Zina's red hair and stripped body. A hole was burned through her eye socket. She had moved on the emperor, and maybe she was the one who had succeeded in killing him. He needed to satisfy his curiosity as he searched the bodies. When he found Adrian, he felt the pain of loss. Adrian was like an estranged brother to Constantine. There was no time to bury him. He couldn't find Castile or a number of others in the company. Had they gotten away? Or did Octavian have them in chains? With no allies and few places to go, Constantine made his way north toward the capital to get the answers he wanted and the revenge he needed. I rested in my gently rocking hammock for the rest of the day with the porthole open. The rushing water drowned the crew's calls on deck as the shorebreaker moved through the sea, getting further from the Tellian Empire. I only had a few books remaining in my dimensional space, but I took the opportunity to read them. My primary reading material was an interesting elvish book on medicinal herbs. It was one of the few books I had remaining from Kaelora, and it gave me the chance to work on my elvish and study rarer flora and their uses. Even after 1,500 years, the text and pictures had not faded at all. Toward evening, a loud knock came at my door, and I was fairly certain it was Maveth before I even opened it. Maveth's head almost touched the ceiling when I answered the door. He leaned inside my room and looked around. Very small. My cabin is larger and my hammock is almost as big as Dee's. "Have you tried out the captain's hammock?" I asked with a smirk. "Not yet, but she offered. The one in my cabin fits me well enough, though." I lost my tongue momentarily, as I was not privy to the conversation where Desdemona offered her hammock to Maveth. My large friend seemed oblivious to flirtatious or suggestive comments by the opposite sex. "Did she press you for information about me?" I asked my friend conspiratorially. Maveth beamed brightly. "She tried to get me drunk and tell her your spell form. Don't worry, I have not revealed any of your secrets." He bit his lip, reconsidering. He admitted, "Except that you are dead." "Well, that the Tellian Empire thinks you are dead. She asked if anyone would come looking for you, and I let it slip. If that was all he revealed, then I would be fine with his slip of the tongue." "How are you doing, Maveth?" I asked as he squeezed into my small room. "I am well. I just checked on dinner and came to inform you that you are welcome to join us in the captain's mess when the bell sounds." He squatted on a stool. I decided I prefer checkers over backgammon. He said it like it was a major revelation, so I had to ask, "And why is that?" "There is too much chance involved with the dice." He leaned in and whispered conspiratorially, "And I think Dee cheats. No one can roll as many double sixes as she does every game." I released a chuckle. No doubt our Adventurers Guild captain was using loaded dice, or her spell form that gave her 2 chances with every roll. It was not like Maveth and I needed to eat, but I would go for the social aspect. Marinated lamb, roasted vegetables, fresh bread, and a few other scents I could not identify, Maveth said, licking his lips, clearly salivating. "I found that with my own ring. I was rarely hungry or salivating. You didn't reset your ring, did you?" I narrowed my eyes accusatorially. Maveth looked away, not making eye contact. "I might have accidentally taken it off for a moment," he admitted. I just shook my head in disappointment. "I will join you two for dinner." I was tempted to remove my own ring, but the secondary benefit of only needing 2 hours of deep sleep was too valuable to lose. "Excellent." Maveth beamed. "Dee was hoping you would. I will go inform her of your impending company." Maveth escaped my cabin, probably thinking I would scold him for resetting his ring of sustenance if he remained. An hour later the ship's evening bell rang for dinner. I found the small captain's dining room on the port side. It was not luxurious. A long, worn table with seating for 10 dominated the room. Only Maveth and Desdemona were seated, and there were 3 place settings. It appeared this was a family-style meal, with 6 large bowls in the center of the table. 3 were steaming with rice, cubed grilled lamb, and vegetables. The other 3 bowls had bread, fruit, and olive paste. My attention was drawn to a smiling Desdemona after surveying the food. She had braided her hair, washed her face, and wore a dark blue V-neck tunic that hugged her torso and accentuated her bust. She had a silver chain that perfectly overlapped her tan lines. She was seated at the head of the table with Maveth to her right. The 3rd place setting was to her left, and I considered sitting opposite her at the other end of the table before taking the seat prepared for me. Desdemona's perfume overpowered the delicious scent of the food. As soon as I sat down, Maveth started to help himself. I waited patiently and asked Desdemona, "How is our speed?" 6 days to Sunko. "We are flying the Adventurers Guild flag. No one on the seas should challenge us. Krakens rarely attack ships, as there is enough for them to feast on below the waves. There are no known merfolk settlements on our route either. My weather mages are excellent, and we will not have to fear storms or rough waters." I nodded, suitably impressed. "What of the Tellian Navy?" I asked, taking some warm bread and spreading the olive paste on it. She said thoughtfully, Telhian Navy? I think the elves sank 2 of their 6 known warships. The other 4 are probably hiding in a harbor somewhere. Other than that, they have a few dozen shore runners, nothing that will venture as far offshore as we are. She speared and chewed on a piece of lamb while maintaining eye contact with me. The Tellians have not had a strong navy in over 200 years. The Emperor decided it was too costly to maintain warships. From my understanding, back then there were krakens, sea serpents, and even a leviathan terrorizing the local seas. The Emperor invested heavily in his portal network instead. Maveth was already filling his plate for a second helping. Portals are rare elsewhere in the world. I didn't even know they existed before I came to the Tellian Empire. I assume being able to find enough mages with a high enough displacement affinity willing to do the daily spellcraft is difficult. Desdemona pointed her fork in Maveth's direction and said, "You know, building those permanent portal stones really cost the Empire a lot of gold. I won't lie, it was a solid investment. It's actually one of the things that other kingdoms envy about the Tellian Empire." She let out a frustrated huff. "Maybe the only thing they admire. Plenty have tried to replicate their portal network, but they can never quite get it right." My stomach lurched for a moment as the ship fell. Desdemona's attention turned sharply. She was ready to leave to check on it, but a moment later, Isaac's head popped in the door. Just an unnaturally large swell. We came down the other side of it fast. Desdemona settled but seemed on edge while dinner continued. "I tried the lamb before asking about the Adventurers Guild. When we get to Essenham, I just check into the guild hall and Maveth can register as a member." Desdemona arched her brow and smirked. "Not that easy. There is an immigration and customs office in the port. They will search you, check you for diseases, and question you on your business. With your guild medallion, it shouldn't be too painful." She tapped her chin in a teasing manner. "But probably with the war there may be inquisitors to question you as well. If that is the case, I suggest you tell them the truth. Just tell them you are a legionnaire deserter." I nodded but wasn't too concerned with my bone inscriptions. Maveth was working on his 3rd plate and slowing down a bit. "What questions will the inquisitors ask me?" he asked, concerned. "Will it be hard to join the guild?" "Goliaths are generally welcomed in all countries. I doubt their inquisitors will question you." She patted his hand to alleviate his worry and eyed me, indicating I was not likely to be as lucky. "Not many Goliath adventurers, though. You won't have any trouble registering. The fee varies between the different guild halls. It probably costs more in Essenham than the Empire. But I can write you a recommendation and have the fee waived." She smiled at him. I couldn't decide if she was trying to make me jealous or if she was really interested in Maveth. I decided to act indifferent to her teasing. I assumed she had dressed up for me, but you know what they say about assumptions. I focused on getting as much information as I could. "Will we have trouble using the portals as adventurers? Getting teleported from Sanko to Arteria will be difficult. The elves are cautious about who is traveling to their capital. Being ported from Arteria to Gramney, less so. You will be searched in Gramney upon arrival, but the Grand Duchy relies heavily on trade and doesn't like to upset travelers unless they are suspicious." She winked at me and smirked. Desdemona finished her plate and reclined in her chair, stretching. She had excellent posture, her chest straining against the fabric. She was definitely eyeing menacing me and not Maveth, but I was enjoying the game of ignoring her now. Maveth, thinking ahead to entering Orklands, interrupted our little game. "What do adventurers do in Orklands, same as in any land? Clearing dungeons, guarding caravans, serving as bodyguards, hunting monsters, and investigating crimes. The orcs take dungeon delving very seriously. Dungeons unattended for too long release their monstrosities into the endless dark, and they eventually find their way to the surface. The Bhutan Caliphate guards all the exits from the endless dark fiercely. There is probably no safer kingdom on this continent when it comes to roaming creatures." I thought Maveth was smart to ask. Maybe we could get a head start on understanding the challenges of looking for his sister. "What about orcs themselves? The books I read were old and not very detailed." Desdemona's face split into a grin. "You are going to the Bhutan Caliphate and don't know about their culture?" My sour face made her raise her hands. "Fine. The Bhutan orcs are divided into 3 classes: the clerics, the warlords, and the people. The clerics are orcs who can cast true magic. They rule the caliphate, and their leader is called the Supreme or Supreme Cleric. They govern all the politics and laws. The warlords train and lead all the warriors. A warlord might be the captain of a warship, a general overseeing a barracks in a city, or the head of a family of pathfinders. Warlords are the only orcs who can own slaves in the caliphate. The clerics cannot own slaves, I asked, confused about the hierarchy. Usually, those with power did what they wanted, Desdemona shrugged. You would have to ask an orc why they can't. My guess is that it is some power balance. Only warlords can own land as well. The people are the citizens, farmers, craftsmen, merchants, and children. They can own buildings but not the land under it. It sounded like a confusing caste system. Is there a way to purchase a slave from a warlord? Maveth asked eagerly. Desdemona seemed confused by his enthusiasm, and I guessed Maveth had not told her the true reason we were venturing into the caliphate. She still thought I was fleeing the Tellian Empire and planning to hide among the orcs. Desdemona took a moment to organize her thoughts. I am not an expert on the Bhutan orcs. I have dealt with orc pirates outside the caliphate and orc mercenaries before. But in general, I have taken the philosophy that when I see a Bhutan warship, if it doesn't bother me, I won't bother it. I know the warlords live by 6 tenets. Do you know what they are? I asked when she didn't offer them. You are asking about things I learned as a child. Loyalty to family is the first, she stated, quickly getting into a groove. Might to rule over those beneath you. Honor the people you rule. Respect the land. Courage in the face of your enemy. Courage in the face of your enemy. Maveth had leaned forward, and the 6th. Desdemona thought hard, not wanting to disappoint. It translates into something like their version of righteousness. Basically, it means to be honest with yourself and your enemy, and to have a purpose in your killing. From my interactions with and observations of the Bhutan orcs to date, this seemed to fit. The table was silent for a time before I spoke. Thank you for the dinner and conversation. Desdemona looked surprised that I was standing to leave. Do you want some kava? Perhaps a game or two of backgammon. Kava was coffee from Singa, and that had me tempted to stay. I never got the coffee beans from the dungeon roasted to make my own. I paused, acting as if I was considering before saying, Not tonight. I winked at her. Besides, Maveth says you cheat. Maveth was caught off guard and coughed so hard he choked. I made my exit after taking in Desdemona's incredulous expression. Yeah, it was totally worth it. And from her lack of denial, I guessed she did cheat. I checked on Ginger before heading to my cabin. It wasn't long before I was in the dreamscape working on my Elvish. I thought my Elvish was getting better. I even ventured to have Raelia join Fabian and myself as I practiced in the dreamscape. Raelia had another opinion of my proficiency, and gave it with her sharp tongue. You are insulting a language that has been spoken the same for 10 millennia. You are better off sticking to Tellian. I think he is much improved, Fabian said, defending me. I pointed at Fabian, but Raelia just rolled her eyes, which was a habit I had taught her in the dungeon. The truth was that my Elvish was decent compared to before. Just like studying spell forms or practicing with my weapons, it was easier to take what I learned in the dreamscape to the real world. Xavier and Constantine were sparring on the far side of the Scorpion Chamber. They were tossing good-natured insults back and forth, which seemed to revolve around me and not their contest. It gave me the thought that practicing with the blade and learning Elvish didn't need to be mutually exclusive, thinking that I might have to practice against Desdemona again. I created her likeness and entered practice with her while Constantine and Xavier paused to give me feedback. I exited the dreamscape in the middle of the night. The water rushing along the hull outside my porthole was strangely soothing, along with the slow swinging of the hammock. I pulled out my last glowstone, and the light purple major essence I had gotten from Corvus. I turned the intellect essence in my hand, considering where it had come from, how it could improve me, and what it might be worth to someone else. I held the glowstone behind it, and watched the swirling colors play within, inspecting it from every angle I could. It was odd to imagine the power held in the small sphere. Maybe not this sphere, but the magic affinity spheres. Once we got to the safety of a city, maybe I would have the courage to unlock the water affinity. I had a pair of Apex water essences in a dimensional space. I stopped debating, pushing aside my reluctance, and consumed the intellect essence. A slight feeling of vertigo, and then my thoughts crystallized. My recent elvish lessons played at high speed in my mind before the rush faded as rapidly as it had come on. My vertigo fled and a slight headache took its place. I pulled a burrito from my space as the hunger pangs from consuming the essence gnawed at my stomach. As I nibbled on it, I questioned our course of action. Maybe the intellect essence was having an effect. The smart thing to do would be to pay an experienced adventuring group to extract Renna for us. I would only need to sell one of the artifacts in my dimensional space to hire them. No, Mevith wouldn't agree to anything other than going himself. Still, the odds seemed oppressive, as it was us against a nation of orcs. I was hoping Castile and the company were in Gramney. But then again, why would they join us? I hated thinking so much. I swung out of the hammock and went on deck. A stiff, cold breeze was keeping the sails taut without the aid of the mages. A handful of glowstone lanterns swung with the waves at vital locations. A few of the sailors tiredly walked the deck. "Need help, Eric?" Isaac asked, walking toward me. "I don't need much sleep." A thought occurred to me. "Do any of the crew speak Elvish?" "Aye. A few. I have a grasp of it, but Leoch grew up with Elvish parents. He is our boatswain." He switched to Elvish, looking to learn a few words so the elves don't string you up by your balls. "Or maybe you hope to seduce an elf and take her maidenhood?" I replied in Elvish. "They don't have strings strong enough, and elf maidens are overrated." Laughing, Isaac switched back to Telian. "Not too bad. I could always use the practice, too." Leoch would expect a few large coppers for his time, but like I said, he grew up with the elves. His mastery of the tongue far surpasses mine. It is a good language to know, as it is the only tongue spoken the same in every corner of Dizia. I spent the rest of the night talking with Isaac by the helm, adding dozens of words to my vocabulary and getting comfortable in conversational Elvish. When the sun rose, I was handed off to Leo. The boatswain repaired the ship and kept it seaworthy. Most of his job was scraping the barnacles off the hull when they were in port. But today he was replacing a recently damaged deck plank so that no one would trip on it. "You don't mind helping me with my Elvish?" I asked in Elvish as I served as his assistant with the task. "Not at all. Keep your coin. Isaac was just trying to do me a favor." The middle-aged man smiled. "But I wouldn't be opposed to you helping with my duties while we practice." "Not a problem," I replied in Elvish. We talked as we worked. He corrected me when needed and filled in the gaps in my knowledge. We started by repairing the damage to the deck that Mevith had caused, and then moved on to inspect the rigging on the sails, grease the pulleys, check all the anchor pins, and wax them. We finished all his work shortly after midday. My Elvish was a work in progress. The language had not changed in millennia, and I learned there was a formal form of the language reserved for court and royalty. It was unlikely that I would ever need the formal tongue of Elvish, but Leoch's adoptive parents were actually part of the Elven court, so I got a crash course in formal Elvish. While we worked, I had learned Leoch's life story as well, as we needed to keep the conversation going, and I wasn't going to volunteer much beyond my time in the Legion. I grew up in Ezenham. My parents adopted me from an orphanage. They were too old, even for elves, to have children, so they liked to visit other cities and adopt children. I don't know why they adopted a human, but I was a cute kid. He smirked. I think it made them feel young to have children constantly around. They were good to us, and I have a dozen brothers and sisters across Ezenham. I will never want for a place to stay. Are humans accepted in Ezenham then? I asked. He nodded. I wasn't bullied growing up, if that is what you are asking. Elves generally treat every race with respect if it is given in return. He chewed his tongue before continuing. The only exceptions are half-elves. Human and elf coupling is uncommon, so resulting half-elves are rare and very few exist. I am ashamed to say it, but I joined in the harassment of 2 half-elves growing up. Stupid kids do stupid things, he huffed, and went silent for a time after that. To revive our conversation, I changed the topic. Why are you on an Adventurers Guild ship? I asked with genuine curiosity. He explained with a grin. Getting my shipwright license in Esenhem takes a 50-year apprenticeship. By the time that happened, I would be retiring. Instead, I joined the Adventurers Guild and signed on as the boatswain to the Shorebreaker. With our day's work finished, I handed Leok an apple, which he happily munched on. These are out of season, easily worth a silver in Esenhem and well worth my time. Since it was a fresh dungeon apple, it was probably worth more. But I didn't tell him. I had no want for coin, and Ginger might object to me selling my stock of apples. Ginger had settled in, and the deckhands were taking excellent care of her as promised. Any advice for traveling in Esenhem? I waved Mavith over, planning to take a break, but I would be back tomorrow to practice again. The cities of Esenhem are ruled by a regent. A council votes on the regent to serve a 20-year term of service, which is usually renewed. My mother was an advisor to the regent, and my father cared for the regent's estate. My advice is, don't piss off the regents. Check the local laws in the guild hall. He reached out, and we shook wrists. Can I help again tomorrow? I still need a lot of work on verb tenses. Leoch nodded happily. And proper names. You can insult someone if you address their station as too low in relation to yourself. He was making it sound more complex than it actually was. Every elf was at a higher station than me, so I hadn't been practicing addressing those of lower station. Maybe Leoch had a bad experience growing up. I practiced on deck with Mavivith in the afternoon. I found myself uninvited to the captain's dinner that evening. Apparently, calling the captain of the ship you were sailing on a cheater was frowned upon. I had thought she would find a way to tease me back, but instead she was giving me the cold shoulder. I really needed to work on my flirting skills. At least Mavith was enjoying his time with Desdemona. 4 days into our voyage, I was helping Leoch repair the port railing, while he helped me struggle through obscure elvish vocabulary. A call rang down from the crow's nest. Sighting! Port aft! The bell rang immediately after, and the ship became a flurry of activity. I rushed to the stern to find Desdemona there with her spyglass out. What is it? I asked, thinking it was another ship. She didn't answer me, and instead yelled to Isaac at the helm. Come starboard half a turn. Mavith joined us at the stern, and I asked for my spyglass back since Desdemona had not answered me. I smugly put my larger spyglass to my eye. After a few well-practiced adjustments, I could see the disturbance in the water. An array of dorsal fins cut the surface. Cool dolphins, I noted. Not dolphins, sharks, Desdemona retorted irritably. Confused, I reacted defensively to my error. I didn't know sharks swam together like that. They don't unless they are being controlled. She looked at me, and then back and forth between her small spyglass and my larger one. She reached for my artificed spyglass, and I released it. I knew Pickle up in the crow's nest had a lesser artifice spyglass, but it was weaker than my hound one. Desdemona's current brass one was not artificed at all. She put my spyglass to her eye and cursed. Circe's tits. They are changing to match our course. They are just sharks. They shouldn't be able to do anything to the Shorebreaker. I knew she had to be concerned for a reason, so I was hoping my statement would prompt an explanation. Looking through my spyglass, she responded, I said they were being controlled. A long hiss escaped her lips, and she yelled to her crew. Sahagin! This caused another flurry of activity as the crew made to repel boarders. What is a Sahulagin? I asked as Desdemona rushed away to prepare. We didn't cover many sea creatures in Hearn's lectures. Thankfully, Leoch was close to me and informed us. It is pronounced Sahaguan. They are fishmen, more commonly called sea devils. They are controlling the sharks. They are swarming, either to relocate their queen or establish a new queen. If you know anything about ants or bees, it is the same thing. The masts groaned as the mages increased the wind to maximize our speed at Desdemona's calm but loud order. I could hear a flurry of activity below the deck as well. The deckhands securing all the portholes. The crew was strapping on hardened leather armor pieces, and those with bows and crossbows sought a position to fire from. The crew was practiced in their preparation, but you could sense a very somber mood. They are merfolk? I asked Leoch as I observed the bustling activity and began to retrieve my adventurer armor from my dimensional space to put it on. I had learned a great deal about the dangers on land in my new world. I even witnessed some young merfolk harvesting on the night shore while I was a sentry for a hound, but my overall understanding of the threats in the oceans was limited. Leoch coughed a laugh as he checked his knives on his person. No? Oh, if you call a merfolk a sahuagin, the insult can only be repaid with your death. They are mortal enemies of the seas. At least merfolk can be reasoned with. Sahuagin will consume anything and everything in their path. They are the locust plague of the sea, and have earned the name Sea Devils. Desdemona returned to our position to check on the swarm. Using my spyglass, she noted in a detached tone, "They are closer. Maybe 2 hours before they overtake us." She handed back my spyglass, giving me a slight nod in thanks for its use. "How deep in the shit are we?" I asked, after looking at the swarm for myself. All I could see were over 100 shark dorsal fins, but it was too difficult to count accurately. The orc warships generally keep the sahuagin populations in check in the endless salt sea. "Their fight with the Tellians must have distracted them from their task," she said, looking at me and speaking in an accusatory tone like it was somehow my fault. "The best we can hope for is that they tire of the pursuit and go look for slower prey. We were lucky we did not cross their path during the night. By the number of sharks, I'm guessing over 100 warriors." I remained on the stern and watched with Desdemona, Mavith, and Isaac as the foamy water in the distance got closer and closer. When Desdemona was certain we were going to be overtaken, she barked an order at her 2 mages. "Conserve your aether for the fight." It wasn't time to hide my aces, as it was clear our lives hung in the balance. I summoned a bow and quiver to my hand. Desdemona's eyebrows arched in surprise. Her eyes flitted to my rings, probably thinking one was a storage device. I wasn't wearing my gloves as I had been working on my tan. She responded seriously, "I have never fought more than a riding party of 30 or so before. They give no quarter, so fight till you are dead. Don't let them drag you into the water. The warriors will try to get on deck, net you, and pull you overboard for the sharks to finish you." I digested her words. That sounded awfully unpleasant. A large shark appeared 400 yards away, with a strange fish-like humanoid riding on its back. It emitted a challenging sound, revealing sharp teeth beneath its unsettling lips. Its blue and olive-skinned body was dominated by webbed appendages. As I prepared to take action, all I could think was, "They certainly are ugly." The churning water at the stern split as the school of sharks moved to encircle the shorebreaker. The mages had stopped calming the water, and our ship now rose and fell as it crashed through the waves after our failed attempt to outrun the swarm. Mavith lamented having lost his bow as I released my first arrow. The large dorsal fin was 50 yards away, but I misjudged the ship's movement and overshot my target. By chance, the arrow thudded into the fin of another shark. Desdemona hissed at me, "Don't waste your arrows on the sharks. Save them for the fishmen." I was about to say I couldn't see the fishmen when I noticed the light reflecting oddly on the swelling water. Just below the churning surface, the drab-green humanoids swam en masse. Fuck, there were a lot of them, and more sharks were interspersed among them just below the surface. A foolish sahuagin was almost breaking the surface near the ship, and I quickly put an arrow into it. It spun away quickly, disappearing into the dark depths of the sea. Both the arrows I had released had the hound-bleeding toxin on them, which should kill their targets in time. Maybe it was too much to hope that the sharks would go into a feeding frenzy as well due to the bleeding. Other archers and crossbowmen started to release their arrows and bolts. Once they started boarding, the bows would be useless. My next 2 arrows failed to land. One went high, missing a shark, and the other missed because I misjudged how deep beneath the surface one of the sahuagin was. Mavith's voice cut through my concentration. "Why haven't they attacked?" "They are either planning to sink us or, more likely, waiting for all their warriors to get in position to rush us at once from all sides. They may be feral creatures, but they are not stupid," Desdemona said angrily as she watched the sea devils taunting us from below the waves. When I was out of both my hound and pathfinder arrows, I produced the 2 lesser runic swords I had taken from First Citizen Boris mercenaries, handing one to Isaac and the other to Leok. They took the blades with surprised nods of thanks, but the grimness on their faces told me they doubted that we would live. Another sailor I didn't know barked a warning. "If they are not trying to sink us, they will attack the sails first." His warning manifested moments later. The large sahuagin riding the shark behind us raised a trident coated in flames in the air and flung it at our sails. The trident flashed over 100 yards in a blink. It tore through our primary sail, splashing unnatural fire across it. The magical fire quickly spread before slowing, leaving a sizable hole in the sail. The sail rippled and whipped loudly, signaling the loss of speed. I soon felt it as the deck lurched beneath my feet and we slowed. Dozens of bone grappling hooks started to appear along our rails. As the crew moved to hack the grappling lines, the Sahuagin surfaced and flung spears from the water at those braving the railings. Very few crew had arrows left to attack the exposed targets. A focused Desdemona screamed an order. "Now, Lasho!" Lasho. Lasho was the mage who specialized in calming the waters around the shorebreaker. He wove a complex spell form a few feet from me. Loud cracking sounds erupted around the ship, giving me hope, but the ship rapidly slowed further. I went to the edge of the railing and dodged a spear, but I still managed to peek overboard. Ice was spreading from the hull outward. Some fishermen were trapped in the ice, and others had lost the lines attached to the grappling hooks. "Lasho, get below deck!" Desdemona yelled as she made to cut a grappling line. Lasho was weak on his feet from the massive ether expenditure. Looking at him, I wondered if he had burned his channels. I moved along the stern, flicking my wrist and cutting the grappling lines with my dimensional space. Since I was performing this from almost 10 feet away, my gesture was intended to conceal exactly how I was accomplishing the feat. A fish head appeared over the railing and I raced forward to decapitate it with the black blade. The head rolled onto the deck and the body fell back into the water, but another head appeared to my right. Maveth's hammer came down with a grunt. The head of the Sahuagin burst like a watermelon, covering us in fishy-smelling shrapnel. I spit something out of my mouth. "I really don't like sushi." "What is sushi?" Maveth questioned the unfamiliar word as his hammer came down again. This time, I used his body as a shield before I was splattered again. "Raw fish, Maveth," I answered as I reached out and cut 2 more grappling lines in quick succession with my dimensional space. "I agree. Raw fish is too chewy. But why are we talking about food in the middle of a fight?" Maveth said as he dodged a net from below. The net was intended to entangle the victim, allowing them to be pulled back over the railing. As the net started to drag across the deck, I cut the attached line with my dimensional space so Maveth didn't get tripped or entangled. Cries of battle were all around us, and the chaos only escalated. The pitched battle for the ship was confusing, and I was cutting fishmen down, slicing nets, and cutting grappling lines as fast as I could. The reassuring presence of Maveth at my side moved with me. I cast an air shield to intercept a net targeting me, and looked at the rest of the ship. The ice ring was working. Only a few fish creatures managed to board and were quickly dispatched. Although they were bipedal, their webbed appendages hampered their movement. More and more of the nets were being cast blindly in hopes of snaring the crew. One crewman had his arm tangled and was being dragged across the deck. I leaped off the stern castle to the lower deck and cut the line at the railing with my blade. I continued my momentum to cut another fishman climbing aboard. The deck briefly shook as Maveth landed nearby. My tall shadow wasn't going to be separated from me. Together we made our way down the port side, clearing Sahuagin and grappling lines. Although they were not coming fast, there seemed to be an endless supply of the fishy creatures. I could tell Desdemona's crew was slowly losing. At least 4 had fallen to spears, and another 4 were too injured to fight. The injured crew moved to the center of the deck to be defended by others. The ship's healing mage was unable to attend to them. I shouted, "Healing potions!" I slid a handful of the Pathfinder potions across the deck toward the injured, and then turned back to the fight. Desdemona had remained on the stern, and was fighting alongside her first mate, Isaac, and 3 other crew. We had bought ourselves a little breathing room, as the grapples stopped coming, and the sea devils were forced to climb the hull. It was a much slower process for them than climbing with the aid of the grappling line. Our wind mage, Vodoma, was using something like my air discs to help defend her crewmates, and Maveth and I briefly protected her rear while the injured crew recovered with my potions. Someone shouted, "Help in the bow! Got it! Got it!" I grunted after gutting a fishman. I moved off the port side toward the bow as 2 larger Sahuagin, each with 4 arms, had just climbed aboard. The pair quickly overwhelmed the lone crewman, and one held their victim, while the other bit into the hapless man's neck. The needle teeth cut easily into the flesh, and blood sprayed as the Sahuagin tore the sailor open. Mavith's deep and winded voice yelled behind me, "If they have 8 arms between them, does that make them an octopus?" I didn't have time to shake my head as I reached the pair, Mavith's heavy steps resounding reassuringly behind me in support. My target was the one feasting on the now dead crewman. Its partner tried to protect my target, imposing itself in my path. The abomination stood as tall as Mavith and raised 2 spears in its upper arms, while the lower pair prepared for me with bone daggers. If it hadn't been so windy, I would have been able to use my pellets. My air shield deflected its first spear attack, and my blade the other. I remained out of reach of the daggers as I removed one of its spear arms in an upward slash. As the arm flew away, the Sahuagin's sharp scream drew its brethren's attention to our fight. Its pained, foul cry ended as Mavith's hammer descended on its chest, sinking in with a squelch. My aether shield flashed as a trident deflected away from me in a flash of fire. The same Sahuagin who had ignited the primary sail had thrown it from the water and was riding his mammoth shark below the bow. Even now, the sails still burned above as ash floated in the air around us. The 4-armed fishman used the leader's distraction to attack my side. Mavith barked a warning but couldn't help me in time. My black blade got around to deflect the first spear while my hand slapped away the other. An air shield blocked one of the daggers, but the bastard got its 4th arm around my defense. The dagger punched into my rib cage. My leather adventurer's armor offered only brief resistance, but my spider silk shirt underneath aided in minimizing penetration. Mavith yelled as the head of his hammer thrust straight out over my shoulder, shattering the bloody, sharp teeth of the creature and continuing out the back of its head. These 2 4-armed devils were clearly the strongest of the Sahuagin swarm, and we had taken them out easily enough. They had probably waited for us to soften up before joining the assault. The scream of rage from the large, shark-riding Sahuagin made me pause to take everything in. Another trident was being handed to him from the water. Dozens of bodies of the fishermen and crew were strewn across the deck while fighting still raged. I activated an air shield as the fiery trident approached, stopping it and causing a wave of heat and flame to pass over me. I gave the fisherman leader the finger even though he didn't know what it meant. I looked for where I could help the most. Back in the stern, Desdemona was fighting alone and looked about to be overwhelmed. "Mavith, hold the bow!" I didn't wait for him to respond as I raced down the length of the ship to help Desdemona. The deck was coated with a thick layer of blood, and I slid ran to the captain's aid. My side was almost healed as I cut a net to free a crew member on the way. 3 large nets appeared over the stern, 2 of them catching Desdemona. They immediately went taut and started dragging her to the railing. She ditched her sword for 2 daggers on her belt and furiously tried to cut herself free, but she had no chance of succeeding in time. I vaulted off a crate up to the stern castle and slammed into the railing to stop my momentum. My blade came down, cutting the 2 lines attached to the nets. I winked at Desdemona as a spear pierced my back. Damn it, no good deed goes unpunished. I moved away from the stern and fell to my knees. I looked down. The spear had punched through my gut. Isak was holding a massive gash closed as blood coated his hands. I reached for my belt and tossed him some Pathfinder healing potions. "Healing potions," I muttered, my throat parched. "What about you?" he rasped as he fumbled for the vials on the blood-slick deck. "Just a flesh wound," I rasped, in some pain. I cut the back of the spear with my dimensional space and gritted my teeth as I pulled the remains of the spear out through my chest. My sense of humor was lost on Isak as he looked on in shock. Annoyingly, the adventurer's armor wasn't cooperating, making the process more difficult. I wish it had made the process of going in more difficult than coming out. I took a hound healing potion as I tried to stand, but I was very shaky from blood loss. Both the potion and my healing spell form worked on closing the injury. I leaned on the mast for support as I looked over the carnage. Desdemona had not freed herself from the 2 nets yet, and the Sahuagin was about to reach her. She was too far away to help her in time, and I didn't know where my black blade was. The black spear appeared in my hand, and I flung it weakly at the fishman. It had been instinctual, and I thought at the last moment, shit, I'd better not miss. The spear pierced the creature and it fell onto the struggling captain. Her head jerked toward me, and I gave her a slight nod as I focused on healing. That spear had done a significant amount of damage. The Sahuagin looked to have exhausted themselves now, as very few were climbing on deck. At least a dozen crew members were still fighting. Mavith stood defiantly in the bow with a half-dozen bodies around him, including the large Sahuagin who had been tossing the flaming tridents. I took a step, testing myself before I moved to help Desdemona free herself. She was covered in blood and gore from rolling around on the deck. "Need a healing potion? Need a healing potion?" "Are you wounded?" I asked as I assisted her. She looked me in the eyes and then gazed down at the bloody hole in my armor. "Nothing urgent," she said, respect and gratitude in her eyes. Isaac was now standing. Mavaith took down the prince. "It has broken their spirit, and the rest are moving away to protect their queen." He was pointing at the shark-infested water, where the fins were moving away from the ship. I retrieved my black spear and made it disappear. To Desdemona's wide-eyed shock, I found my black blade among the bodies and body parts, and I took the stairs instead of jumping off the stern deck this time. I went to help clean up the mess. Only a few Sahuagin were alive, but they were suffocating out of the water, making gurgling sounds. They were all heavily injured, and I moved about the deck, silencing them. Mavith came over to me. He had a half-dozen minor injuries and was covered in Sahuagin guts and his own blood. He had a massive grin on his blood-speckled face. "I get it now. You don't like sushi." The sun was already making the deck sticky with drying blood. The first calls were to stabilize the injured. Pickle, his right arm in a sling, climbed laboriously up to the crow's nest to resume his watch, but I thought the Sahuagin had been bloodied enough that they would not return. Still, Desdemona was eager to get the ship moving and gain distance. I overheard Isaac talking. "It is unlikely they will return, but they could always decide to be vengeful and sink us. The ice coating on the underside of the hull won't last much longer." I hadn't been aware that the ice had encased the underside of the hull. As I looked over the dozens of bodies and parts, the fish smell was already rising to a dangerously high level of nauseating. "Desdemona, do you have a collector?" She had been facing away from me, talking to Isaac and her mages. She looked exhausted and pained, having lost over half her crew. "Collector? Essence collector? Do I look like a wealthy captain to you?" she said, a little exasperated at the question and her despairing situation. "Then you don't mind if I use mine?" I asked, eyeing the Sahuagin Isaac had called a prince. Shocked looks passed between her mages and Isaac. They started whispering to each other quietly. "Time is of the essence," I said as they talked. I was disappointed that my clever play on words was missed. Desdemona turned and announced hopefully, "None of my crew and half the essences to the ship." I thought that was greedy on her part, seeing she would have gotten nothing if I hadn't had the collector. But I was just as tired as they were and didn't care to argue. "Fine, but I choose which half Mavaith and I keep." Desdemona waved me off to return to her crew, which I assumed meant she agreed. The battle had lasted almost an hour in my estimation, so many of the slain fishmen would likely yield nothing anyway. I moved to the foul-smelling, messy bow. The fiery trident prince had a shattered leg and his chest was caved in. Mavaith was standing over me as I produced the collector. "You did a number on him," I said appreciatively. "Number? I only struck him twice. He was a tough fight. Stabbed me thrice in return with his oversized fork," he said in a gravelly tone laced with resentment. I shook my head, unsure if Mavaith was trying to be funny or serious. The collector started pulling thick blue etheric smoke. From my past experience, I could already tell this was going to be an apex essence. An apex water essence formed, and I thought it odd, since the prince had imbued his tridents with fire. The essence disappeared into my space, and I looked down at the deck to see if anyone had seen it. Desdemona was facing me, giving orders, but she couldn't have seen what essence had formed. Mavith considered the question longer than I thought he needed to as I got a major coordination essence from the fishman. "Yes, I couldn't protect you from so far away, but I understood the necessity of defending the bow. I can take care of myself," I said casually, and regretted my words as he frowned. "But I count you as a friend, Mavith, and appreciate your concern for my well-being." That seemed to satisfy him, and he nodded curtly with a grin. The other four-armed creature yielded a lesser dexterity essence. It was a bit disappointing, as it was one of the three strongest Sahuagin. Desdemona and Isaac came up to the bow with a few crewmen. "We are laying out the bodies to expedite the use of your collector. I want to get them overboard as quickly as possible. My ship is already starting to carry their foul scent." "Are you done with these?" I nodded, and she ordered, "Search them and toss them." I hadn't thought about searching them. They looked naked except for their metal and bone bracelets and belts. I shrugged, not concerned about the loot. I moved to the main deck and continued my harvesting. In the end, I tried the collector on 67 of the Sahuagin warriors and gained 1 major strength essence, 2 lesser quickness essences, 6 lesser strength essences, 4 lesser constitution essences, 3 lesser dexterity essences, and 1 lesser perception essence. 17 of the 67 had yielded an essence. Although my collector was near perfect in dungeons, it was less effective outside of them. The crew was in rough shape, both physically and mentally, and were moving lethargically. I helped toss the Sahuagin bodies overboard after finishing with the collector. The ruined sail was taken down and cut up. The dead crew were tightly wrapped and weighted and would be buried at sea after a brief ceremony. There was still a lot of work to do before honoring them. 14 of Desdemona's crew had been killed on deck, and 2 more had been pulled overboard. Of the 15 still living, 3 were maimed and unable to work the sails, and another 6 needed time to have their injuries healed after the Mage recovered her ether. Most of the crew worked to retrieve the spare sail in the hold and raise it. While all this was going on, I checked on Ginger. She had clearly panicked and kicked her stall during the fight, splintering the wood. She was excited to see me and forced her head into my chest, butting my head. "It's all right, girl. It's going to take a lot more than a bunch of fish to take me out, but I think we will avoid traveling by boat in the future." With the crew busy, I tended to Ginger and gave her 2 apples with her feed. Returning to the deck, I saw a steady stream of water flowing across the deck from the bow. Lasho was pulling seawater up to the deck with his spell form. On their hands and knees, the crew scrubbed to wash away the blood, scales, and gore. I walked to the still filthy Desdemona at the helm, as the fresh sail was being stretched in the wind, the creases slowly disappearing. I produced all 20 essences I had collected in a bowl. Desdemona's eyes betrayed her surprise and covetousness at the sight of the essences. 20? More than I expected. "Where did you get your collector?" I ignored her question about the collector. "This is everything I collected. Your share is the 6 lesser strength essences and 4 lesser dexterity essences." I pulled the spheres out of the bowl and handed them to her. The muscles in her jaw twitched slightly at seeing the apex water affinity essence remain. Desdemona relaxed as she pocketed the essences. "Isaac is separating the half-share of the jewelry for you and Maveth." I raised my eyebrows, slightly surprised. Maveth and I had accounted for about 1/3 of the dead Sahuagin, but I hadn't expected her generosity. Then again, without our participation, the ship would definitely have been overrun. Perhaps this was an unspoken trade for half of the essences I gathered with my collector. I nodded in thanks. "Leosh has cleaned your runic swords and put them in your room. Thank you for the loan. They helped." Her statement was laced with an unasked question. When I only nodded, she pressed a little more. "Your runic spear was an impressive weapon too. If there is time, I would like to look at it more closely." Unfortunately, there was no innuendo in her tone or on her face. I think she was mostly curious about where I was storing something so large. Still, I couldn't resist responding. "Maybe I will show you my spear after we clean up and are somewhere more comfortable." My grin and tone were full of innuendo, and maybe it was not the right time after she had lost half her crew. But the adrenaline and violence of combat can do strange things to you. "Yes, maybe after cleaning up a bit," she responded, licking her lips and then spitting, regretting her action. Her face still had dried fishman blood on it. "My crew and friends call me D, by the way. If you are not going to help with the cleaning effort, talk with Lasho about a shower." Although her body language was responding to my sensual overtones, her tone was meant to guilt me into helping scrub the deck. It didn't work. As I walked to the bow, I handed Maveth the major strength essence and the 2 quickness essences. He only wanted the quickness essences, but I insisted he'd take the strength essence as well. In the bow, Lasho pulled a stream of seawater higher to fall on the deck in a makeshift shower. With a respectful nod, he noted, "When you're ready to rinse, let me know and I'll remove the salt from the water." I quickly shed my damaged adventurer's armor and all my clothes to make full use of his efforts. The annoying part was removing all the crusty blood and fleshy bits from my hair. I didn't even bother to note if Desdemona was watching. However, Vodoma, the female wind mage, had taken the opportunity to move closer to talk with Lasho. Judging by their broken and nonsensical conversation, it was clear what the middle-aged wind mage was after a closer view. With respect to Lasho's efforts, I washed as quickly as possible before requesting fresh water to rinse. I packed up my fouled clothes and stored them, cleaned my hands, and then produced clean clothes and sandals, to both Mage's surprise and envy. There was no point in hiding my space after what I had displayed in the battle, but I wasn't going to pull any people out or reveal just how large it was. The deck cleaning effort was nearly complete, but the lingering smell of rotting fish was going to persist for a very long time. I patted Maveth on the back on my way by, nodded in the direction of Desdemona, who had her eyes on me, and headed to my cabin. I found the 2 runic blades cleaned and on my hammock, and stored them. I swung in my hammock, trying to sleep, but the fishy scent hung in the air even here. I used the Dreamscape amulet to escape the smell. My manifestation of Scholar Fabian was much more helpful after I poured all the knowledge of Elvish from Isaac and Leoch into him. I spent 4 hours practicing Elvish before being pulled out of the Dreamscape. Instantly, on alert, I was out of the hammock and on my feet. I hadn't secured the door in case we were attacked again, but I had attached a line to it to pull the amulet from my grasp if someone opened my door. That person was Maveth. "Is there an issue?" He had a guilty look on his face at disturbing me. "No. I knocked, and when you didn't answer, I tried the door. It is fine, Maveth." I bent over to retrieve the amulet and untied the string. Maveth was mostly clean as he squeezed into the cabin. "Dee has asked for you to join her for a late dinner." He paused and stressed. "Alone. I think she wants to thank you for your help during the attack." My eyes widened in surprise. I couldn't hold back a smirk, although I had already come down a bit after my combat high. Desdemona had her captain's cabin door open as I reached it. She was dressed in a thin mustard-colored blouse, and her hair was still wet from washing. Her bright smile creased her tanned face as I entered, and she motioned that I should close the door. I complied. She was sitting at the table, and I sat across from her. The table had a spread of dried fruit, jerky, and nuts. Her smile faded. "I apologize for the meal, but Cook was killed in the engagement. The food is fine. I am sorry you lost so many of your crew," I said consolingly. She nodded sharply, and I could tell she was in a bit of pain from the loss. "There is nothing you could have done differently, Dee." She winced like I had stabbed her, and I liked that she felt guilt over losing her crew. It meant she cared about them just like Castile cared about the men of the company. I was modestly hungry from all the healing, so I poured myself a glass of wine and helped myself. "You always second-guess yourself after the battle," she said heavily after regaining herself. She nibbled on some fruit, and there was silence as we both ate slowly. Before long she asked with a silly grin, "You said you would show me your impressive spear." I produced the runic black spear I had used in the fight in my right hand. Her eyes immediately traveled to the golden ring on that hand before her eyes took in the weapon. She clearly assumed the ring was a storage device of some sort. She placed her hand on the black shaft and stroked it some. "Trent obsidian, if I am not mistaken." She eyed the black leaf pattern on the spearhead. "Elvish?" she asked. "Dungeon artifice," I responded, while watching her admire it. There was still some blood drying on the tip. She nodded as her hands ran along the spiraled grain reverently. "What is Trent obsidian?" I asked, watching her intently. "Wood from an ancient Trent. When a Trent's age surpasses its life, it will fall into an eternal slumber, and its wood will blacken, like so. It is the strongest wood known to man and treasured by the elves. I have never seen anything like the spiraling grain pattern, though. You can almost feel the power bound within." I let her admire the weapon before returning it to my storage. Desdemona exhaled like she had been holding her breath. "I cannot thank you enough for saving my ship and crew," Your prowess in battle reminds me of fabled heroes. She cracked a smile, which I returned. You are full of surprises. Her bare foot intentionally brushed my leg under the table. I bet you have another spear hidden away somewhere. Her foot slowly climbed my leg. As Maveth had mentioned, Dee's hammock really was palatial. The massive hammock was far more comfortable than my own. Currently, the short woman was sprawled across my body, sleeping. She was much heavier than I would have thought. Her intense body heat was causing us both to sweat under her heavy blankets. But the alternative was exposure to the cold night air of the sea. Her head rested on my chest, and she drooled slightly as she slept. Well, at least she didn't snore. I had recently used my amulet and didn't need sleep, so I lay awake while she rested after a grueling day. Her perfumed wardrobe held the fishy scent at bay. I lay awake the entire night, playing complex elvish phrases in my head. Before the sun rose, a short, hard knock came at the door. Captain D, first light is coming, and we are ready for honors. D licked her lips, coming away quickly. She pushed off me and barked at the door. Thank you, Isaac. I will be on deck in moments. D slid out of the hammock, ignoring me completely while she dressed. I lay on my side and watched her. When she was almost dressed, she addressed me. You said you wanted to help. We will need help with the sails if we are going to reach port. I'm sure Maveth will help. She wasn't very good at guilt-tripping me. I thought I was the paying passenger here, but I understood the necessity. With an affable smile, I asked, Do I get to keep my cabin upgrade? Her eyes traveled over me quickly while she fought to hide a lecherous smile. Perhaps we can negotiate a suitable payment for such an upgrade. Before we could start negotiations, she was out the door. I rolled out as well, planning to attend the burial services for the dead crew. Bowls of nuts and jerky were tossed carelessly on the floor. Last night, we started by testing the structural integrity of her table before moving to the hammock, and the food had been victimized. I started dressing, shaking out bits of food from my clothes before donning them. I walked on deck as the entire crew moved somberly. The sails were ordered to be luffed so everyone could attend the ceremony. We all gathered near the stern deck, a few crew members eyeing me and nodding in gratitude. Maveth came and stood behind me as we waited. Did you play backgammon all night? He asked quietly. You never came out of Dee's cabin. A little confused, I turned to see a massive grin on Maveth's face. He knew what we had been doing, and we had not been doing it too quietly either. I was coming up with a reply when Captain D stepped forward. D had a sorrowful look on her face and made eye contact with each of her remaining crew. She then stood over the canvas-wrapped bodies and spoke reverently. A bounty given by the seas can be a bounty taken by the waves. The sea is a harsh mistress, but her salt runs in our veins and is hers to reclaim. We give our friends and companions eternal rest in the deep, dark depths of her embrace. We hope they may watch over us until we can join them below the surface. A few men nodded at her words, and two moved to the first body. Isaac came to stand where Desdemona had stood. He took a deep breath. Cook joined the crew in the port of Ishmael 3 years ago. He was the finest cook I served with on any ship, and his stuffed crab cabbage will be missed. Whatever god rules the sea will now be blessed with his services. The two men pulled the wrapped body to the edge and dropped it in the water. The ship had slowed enough that the splash was easily heard. The men moved to the next body, and someone else came to speak in memory of them. I watched the wrapped body float behind the shorebreaker. With the backdrop of the rising sun, it quickly sank in the ship's wash. I stood and listened to someone tell a short story of each crew member before they were sent into the water. When all the bodies were cleared, the two crew who had been pulled overboard by nets were honored with words as well. Without further ceremony, D ordered the ship back to full sail, and the ship lurched under our feet as the wind caught the primary sail once again. Vodoma was still using her ether to heal the crew, but Lasha was calming the waters since his aether had recovered. The rest of my day was spent with Maveth learning how to be a sailor. Truthfully, most of the time it was just Isaac or another of the crew yelling at us what to untie, pull, loosen, or retie on the cleats. Without Vodoma creating our wind directly behind the sails, we needed to constantly work on angling the sails ourselves. At midday, Isaac asked, I thought you would need a break by now. How are the hands? I heal fast. I held them up to show they were completely healed. Earlier, I had untied the wrong line, causing a boom to shift. Foolishly, I grabbed the line and was dragged across the deck before bracing my feet. The hemp rope had been pulled through my hands as I fought the wind, tearing them up. "I can go as long as you need me to," I said confidently. He patted me on the back, smiling. "Well, save some of your energy for the captain." He walked away, smirking to himself. I shouldn't have been surprised that the crew had put the deaths behind them so quickly. It was something I had learned in my Legion company. It hurt, but you found a way to compartmentalize until you could lift a pint of ale in memory. Maveith's gray skin was sun, and wind burned, and he had left for his cabin to rest and eat. I stayed and worked the entire day, finding the work satisfying as I puzzled out what effects my actions had on the sails. That was how I spent my next 2 days, slowly learning to sail during the day and resting in Desdemona's company at night. Mavith would join us for the evening meal, play a game of checkers, and leave. There was nothing romantic about our time together, and I understood I was a distraction from her loss. On the 3rd day, an elven cutter was spotted, and soon the coast. The cutter was half the size of our ship and didn't even have lower decks, but it surfed the waves effortlessly. It sailed parallel to us for over an hour before it moved alongside, and Desdemona conversed with their captain. From the exchange, I learned we were only 20 miles south of Sanko, and they would shadow us there. The shoreline was sandy but turned into thick woodlands after a few dozen yards up the beach. I watched the shore with my spyglass when I was able, and monstrous crabs scuttled across the beach. There were very few signs of civilization until we approached Sanko. The first hint that we were getting close was a large number of fishing boats. Dee was standing next to me. Elves don't like the water much, but they love to eat fish. "That is just the high elves," Isaac said from behind us. "Eric, your loot crate is ready for you when we dock, but you can pick it up at the Adventurers' Hall. They will use it to confirm our Sawagan kills." Isaac left, and Desdemona faced me. "I will help you through customs. If they do have an Inquisitor, tell them you are fleeing the Telian Empire. Try to avoid saying you were a Legionnaire if you can." Our purely physical relationship was over. She turned away from me to bring her ship to port with her message about the dungeon. We approached the massive stone wall, which formed an artificial bay. Our sails were stowed, and Vadama and Lasho guided the ship with their magic. Tower fortifications dotted the wall, and ballistae and bowmen were visible as we sailed past. The water in the bay was eerily calm, with only small waves created by ships underway by magic. It was hard to take everything in at once. The city was built entirely out of stone, and the buildings had no sharp corners. Everything was rounded and flowing like water. Since elves lived for centuries, I didn't know what to expect for my first time in one of their cities. The buildings had numerous garden terraces, but no structure exceeded 5 stories to my eye. With magic and time, I expected something more grandiose. We crossed the bay to some long wooden piers. 4 other ships were here, 3 flying the Barteradian flag. The other ship's flag was unfamiliar. Burly elven shoremen helped tie off the shorebreaker before extending a ramp to our deck. Desdemona had changed into more formal clothes and walked down the ramp alone to wait on the pier. There were elven guards, probably the city watch in dull green garb along the length of the pier, but they seemed surprisingly unconcerned about our arrival. A figure in red marched down the pier. When his flowing robes reached Desdemona, he stopped, and they got into a lengthy conversation. The language was not Telhian or Elvish, so even though I could hear them talk, I had no idea what was being said. All I could do was wait. "It doesn't smell." Mavith's deep voice sounded behind me. I inhaled deeply, and he was right. The familiar salty air was gone, and the persistent fishy smell had vanished from the shorebreaker. Isaac's voice chuckled from behind us. "It's not gone, but sort of purified by some ancient magic. I told you the high elves don't like the smell of fish. Like most elven cities, this city sits in a ley-line nexus, but doesn't have a dungeon. Once we leave the harbor, the fishman's stink will resume." He groaned in realization. Desdemona waved us down the ramp to talk with the port authority. Mavith tramped behind me, and we approached the tall elf. His silvery red robes pooled around him as he assessed us with his eyes. He seemed more interested in Mavith than me, and I assumed Goliaths were rare in Esenhem. Planning to port to Arteria, he finally said in Elvish, I nodded, and then on to Gramney. Your guild medallion? He held out his hand, and I pretended to retrieve my belt, pulling it from my storage. 50 silver for each of you and 5 gold for your horse. He pointed. Pay at the white stone building at the end of the pier. It is the registration office. You need to be screened by the mages to confirm you are in good health. Desdemona interrupted. The Goliath still needs to enroll in the guild. The elf sighed impatiently. He can return to have his medallion stamped. For now, I wish to make certain he will not bring any disease into the city. I now realized that we had moored at the docks for foreign ships. We couldn't enter the city without passing the white building he indicated. After Ginger was unloaded, 2 city guards in pea-green uniforms walked us down the docks to make sure we didn't pass the white building without entering it. I looked curiously up at the other ships as we passed them. The Bardradian ships were bulky merchants with mostly human crews on deck. I did see a chatty halfling and a hairy dwarf sunning himself. One remarkable thing about Sanko was how clean the city was. There was no filth on the smooth cobblestone walkways, and all the buildings looked as if they had been recently washed, the ancient stone looking almost new. Ginger was interested as well, and I just hoped she wouldn't do her business while we were being inspected. For such a large city, there were surprisingly few foreign ships here. I surmised that was probably due to the war. I hitched Ginger to a post outside the white stone building and entered with Maveth. A silvery-haired elf offered us a big smile. New arrivals on the guild ship from the Tellian Empire? He asked in Tellian. Apparently, the idea of slow-moving customs was not unique to Earth. Maveth and I had to endure an hour of questions while the old elf slowly scribed our answers. I got off more lightly than Maveth, maybe because I had the guild medallion or because I was human. The questions from Maveth never seemed to end. Maybe the administrator was satisfying his own curiosity. We ran into our first hurdle when we were asked to declare our artifacts. Maveth readily volunteered. 2 rings, 1 hammer, and a skinning knife. Fortunately, he wasn't required to note what the artifacts did, but the old elf was impressed by the count, judging from his reaction. When my turn came, I crafted my words to be the truth. On my person, I have 2 rings, an amulet, bracers, 1 blade, and 1 dagger. I was wearing one of the simple runic blades from Boris Man as well as Corvu's dagger. My paranoid inner self was screaming at me for revealing so much. Maveth was acting unconcerned, but I felt my anxiety rising. I had trusted so few people for so long, this declaration was not easy. After he wrote out what I had said, he looked up. The belt? His question hung in the air, and I was somewhat shocked. Did he have a way of seeing artifacts, some type of aether sight? I didn't panic and put on an act, pretending I had just forgotten about the belt, which was true. Yes, I overlooked that. It has a few potions in it too. Do you need to log them as well? He studied me and slowly shook his head. No, potions are fine for adventurers. That will be 6 gold for you 2 and the horse. The healing mage will be by this evening. You can wait in that room, and Mikhail can order food for you from the tavern. I placed 6 gold dungeon coins on his desk, and he nodded appreciatively. I checked on and fed Ginger before moving to the waiting room with Maveth. Maveth ordered a ton of food, and from his appetite I guessed he had accidentally removed his ring of sustenance again. It was more than 2 hours before a vibrant, black-haired, blue-eyed elf arrived. He was full of energy and beaming happily. Your mount has been cleared to enter Esenham. I healed her cracked hoof. He looked us over, beaming. It is true, an actual Goliath. Maveth didn't speak Elvish, so I worked as a translator. The medical exam was quick, but like the old elf, the healing mage was curious about Maveth, and it took him over an hour to finish with us. We were still not finished, though. There was another customs room with 2 disinterested guards. My anxiety rose when the older elf said, "Please empty your packs and anything you have in magical storage for us to examine." Well, dragon shit. Although my appearance remained calm, my heart raced. The guards waited expectantly as Maveth complied with their request, emptying everything in his pockets, which was not much. Did they find it odd that we were not carrying large packs only entering the country with the clothes on our backs? Maveth's pack was in my dimensional space, as well as both our sets of armor. My biggest uncertainty was whether they were aware I had a dimensional space. If they could detect it somehow, would I be denied entrance to Esenham if I didn't empty it of everything? I thought it was improbable that they knew about it, but the uncertainty nagged at me, and if they did know, they must have no idea how large it was. Judging by this pair of average-appearing guards, I concluded, I would have been detained immediately if they knew I was carrying 4 people inside my dimensional space. D had advised me that customs was just a formality for adventurers, but this seemed anything but. I waited while the guards inspected everything Mavith placed on the table. They held their hands over the items but did not touch them. They were curious about the Mage's strength essence, but they didn't confiscate it. Instead, they talked to each other in Elvish, hypothesizing about what creature or dungeon it might have come from. When they finished, they indicated it was my turn. I started by emptying my belt pouches, and they immediately had me pause. "What are these?" asked one of them. He pointed at a pile of pellets his hand had just passed over. "Blindness pellets," I replied, unfazed. I assumed they would not be unusual for adventurers to have. The elf guard chewed the inside of his cheek. "Made from myconid spores?" he finally asked. I nodded, and he indicated that I should proceed. Then he questioned me about the smoke and sneezing pellets, since their shells were different colors. I skipped over the blood compass for now, as it was an artifact I had not declared. Instead, I moved it into my dimensional space. I started stacking large amounts of silver coins on the table, and with each handful, their eyes widened. The guard held his hand up to stop me. "First time? We just need to check for poison, parasites, insects, and diseases you could be carrying." Now it made more sense why the myconid pellets caused them some consternation. These guards must have a spell form similar to Constantine's. The nature of my expansive belt pouches had been revealed, so I didn't backtrack. There were several surprises for them as I continued with the Orc Pathfinder potions. 2 dungeon potions of levitation, and 1 of fire resistance that I kept in my belt. A jar of oblivion pills, and a jar of minty mouthwash. My manticore pouch was also produced, and it had 2 lesser constitution essences in it. I had consumed the other minor essences in my possession, and besides these 2 constitution essences, all I had remaining were the 3 apex water essences. But they were in my dimensional space. Mavith, who had been watching from beside me, proudly noted the origin of the pouch. "I made that for him from the scrotum of a massive manticore bull that we slew together. It was easily over 1,000 pounds. The 2 elves nodded in appreciation. From the size of the pouch, it was clear that it was not a lie. "Is that all?" the guard asked, as I seemed to have concluded pulling endless things from my magical belt. Even I was surprised at how much junk I was carrying around on my waist. I could only imagine their reaction if I started pulling things out of thin air from my dimensional space. The pair were much more alert than when we had started. I had been good entertainment. "Just a crate of dungeon apples," I replied offhandedly. "Are they still on your ship? Nothing else was delivered for inspection?" the elf asked, confused. It was the response I had hoped for. Their response hinted that they were unaware of my dimensional space. Still, a crate of apples appeared on the table, causing both guards to step back. "I was told they were out of season and I could get a few silvers for each," I replied to the dumbfounded guards. After a moment of shock, one of the guards stepped forward and passed his hands over the crate. I had only volunteered the apples because I had placed them in the old crate I used for my Legion supplies. The guard squinted a little as he inspected the contents. "You said dungeon apples?" "Yes. I was considering selling them in your capital," I repeated. The other guard, who had remained quiet for most of the inspection, spoke. "Don't take less than 10 silver each. Don't know of any dungeons that produce apples, and the wealthy nobles will pay that or more in Arteria." The other guard nodded in agreement with his partner's advice. "See Master Dazak on your way out to have your guild medallion emblazoned." The 2 guards left me to put everything back into my belt. The fact that I had volunteered the existence of my dimensional space rankled me a little, but I had already revealed its existence on the Shorebreaker. And there was a risk the crew might talk, so it was for the best. "Are all customs that extreme?" I asked Mavith as I tried to remember where everything went. Mavith thought on the question before responding. "Some are more severe. I have seen artifacts identified and confiscated with no remuneration. Men arrested after being questioned, and men stripped of their wealth for debts they had in other lands. The elves here seem to rely on people volunteering what they are bringing into the country. I guess I just didn't like my secrets being in the open after working for so long to hide them. The old elf was still seated in the entry room, even though it was late in the night. I trust all is well. He smiled at us and held out his hand. I retrieved my medallion and handed it over. He turned it over in his hand and pressed his thumb on the tree. A brief metallic scent stung my nose, and when he removed his thumb, a silver bird reaching for the sun was left behind. As long as you obey our laws, this will get you quickly past future customs. He turned to the Goliath. Friend Goliath, return with your adventurer's medallion in the morning, and I will press our seal upon it. Now it is late, and my ancient bones need some time on a softer surface. The aged elf rose and walked gingerly out a back door. A much younger elf entered to take his place and asked, "Do you require me to summon someone to escort you in the city? Thank you." "We are looking to find our way to the Adventurers' Guild Hall," I replied. "Your Elvish is surprisingly good. I will return in a moment." He left and came back with a guard in the drab-green uniform of the city guard. It was a fairly long walk through the city, and the streets were lit with soft white glowstones. Elves had better low-light vision than humans and Goliaths, so they did not require much light. I tried to use my new night vision, but the overall effect was only a mild improvement due to the short range of the spell form and the filtering of most of the color. Even in the lower city, elves moved about the meticulously clean streets without fear or trepidation. At such a late hour, doing so in Atelian City would be putting yourself at risk from unscrupulous people. Mavith's focus was elsewhere. All the stonework was completed with the shapestone spell form. Much more detailed work than I could have done. I would still take your cozy abode over city life, Mavith. All it takes is practice to improve if you want to mimic these buildings, I reassured my friend as Ginger's hooves echoed behind us. I don't have the either for such creations. It took me years to hollow out the stone for my cabin. His hand brushed a curved corner on a building. The stone here even resists my effort to shape it. It takes a skilled stone shaper to do that, someone who has learned over hundreds of years. I don't have that kind of time, he said resignedly. His statement pained me, as I did have that kind of time. How was I going to spend my centuries upon centuries? My thoughts were interrupted as our guide paused outside a building. The weathered sign had the Adventurers' Guild symbol, a tree with branches covered in leaves mirrored by a root system below. The interior was bright, and soft music played within. I thanked the guard with a silver, which surprised him. There were stables around the back of the guild hall, and we got Ginger settled before entering. I also ordered 1 month of hay and grain to be delivered in the morning. The young elf woman must have thought we were staying in the city long term, and would probably be surprised when it disappeared when we left. The large, ornate common room of the guild hall felt quite somber, and was extremely warm. I noted that Desdemona's remaining crew occupied a few tables, and were well on their way to drunkenness. A number of elves, a few humans, and a pair of halflings I didn't recognize were scattered throughout the room. Just like at the Elven Customs Office, Mavith drew the most attention. Isak held up a mug to salute us. Join us to remember our fallen. He was clearly drunk, and his speech was slurred. 2 of the crew stumbled to another table to give us their seats. As we sat, an elven waitress placed 2 frothy mugs in front of us. She was rail-thin, and her almond-colored hair was plastered to her face with sweat. I guess she was the only one working tonight and was being kept busy by the unexpected crowd of heavy drinkers. Already paid for by the captain, Leok said, saluting me from another table. I sipped the elven ale and found it cold, strong, aromatic, and mildly sweet. The cold beverage made taking large sips all too easy. Mavith drained his own mug, and the serving woman quickly refilled it. "Where is Desdemona?" I asked as I nursed my drink, enjoying the taste more than the alcohol's effects. "She should be back soon," Isak slurred. D. Vodoma and the local guildmaster were off to send a message about the Sawagin attack and the new dungeon in the Telian Empire. "Some of the locals are watching the shorebreaker so we can properly mourn our comrades." He filled his mug from a pitcher before the waitress could, spilling surprisingly little. Some of us mourned faster than others. Leoch indicated Isak, who seemed the most drunk of the group. "Do we have to wait for the guildmaster to return to get Mavith his guild medallion?" I asked as the overworked server placed food in front of us. I dropped a silver on her tray even though the food was already paid for as well. D took care of it. "Mavith needs to fill out the paperwork in the morning. Isaac said as he hiccuped. He tried to stand and nearly fell over. He had trouble searching his pockets, but eventually found 2 keys and stared at them, trying to remember. He then handed one to Mavivith and the other to me. With the compliments of Guildmaster Theodas, he even offered to purchase your Sahuagin prizes. He leaned on the table to get close, his breath heavy with the sweet alcohol. You should accept it. He is paying more than what you would get as a thank you. Dee talked up your battle prowess. At the other table, Leech laughed. If I wasn't there, I would have thought Eric single-handedly held back a Sahuagin hive by the way she told it. Another of the Shorebreakers' sailors interjected. Oh, she was talking about the battle. I thought she had been describing what happened in her cabin after the battle. Everyone was so drunk that they broke into raucous laughter at my expense. Mavith, who was on his 3rd mug, joined in the ribbing with his boisterous, deep voice. I was concerned for Dee's safety, and almost went to check on her the first night. Rather than be the target of the night's jokes, I took my room key and found my room. The room smelled of lavender and sweet citrus oil. The mattress was firm, but slightly spongy. I pulled out my griffin pillow and stripped before lying down. I killed my light buzz with my Purify Self spell form, removing my intoxication completely. The blood compass appeared in my hand and I was hesitant to use it. If Castile had died fighting the Emperor, then her blood would have decayed by now, and I would feel nothing. I pulsed ether into the device, and there was a slight pull. I released a relieved sigh. It took time to orient myself, but I think the compass was pulling almost straight south toward Barteradian lands. Was she captured or making her way to Gramney through enemy territory? I slept a little restlessly that night. I didn't use the amulet or an oblivion pill even as guilt gnawed at me for not trying to help Castile and the others escape. I was up extremely early and checked on Ginger. The stable hand apparently slept in the loft and came down to help me. She hadn't gone out for the hay and grain yet, so I tasked her with getting me a saddle and tack for Ginger. I didn't want a new saddle to break in, just a quality-used saddle so Ginger could start earning her keep. Mavith came down to the common room in severe discomfort from a splitting headache, and I almost wanted him to suffer. Instead, I handed him a morning glory stem to alleviate his hangover. He was unfamiliar with the remedy, so I explained that he was to crush the stem and suck the sap out. His deep voice rumbled across the common room. I never consumed such tasty ale before. I thought it would be disrespectful not to drink with them, but I did get this last night. Mavith proudly produced his Bronze Guild medallion and handed it to me. It had a shiny luster to it and displayed his name, Mavith of the Stoneskin clan. Underneath his name was his guild number, 49, 6,900. Nice, Mavith. Do you want me to head to the customs office with you? I asked, handing it back. I can manage. I think Dee wanted to talk to you before we left. He leaned in conspiratorially. She came into my room last night thinking I was you. I cursed in my head. Damn it, Isaac. You gave me the wrong key. I had missed her parting farewell. After Mavith got a large breakfast, he left with a guide to get his medallion inscribed. Desdemona came down and sat at my table. Her hair was askew, and I thought there was some dried vomit on her shirt, so maybe it was a good thing she hadn't found me last night. I handed her the morning glory and she immediately knew what it was. Crushing it in her hand, she sucked loudly and let out a satisfied sigh. You are more useful than you look, Legionnaire, she said with a smile. Did you enjoy Mavith's company last night? I returned. She laughed. No. Isaac was passed out, and I couldn't remember the other room's number. She got a little more serious. The guild has decided to reward you for your efforts. You are being promoted to the silver rank for saving the Shorebreaker. She produced a silver guild medallion with my name and guild number. My surprise made her smirk. Well, it was either this or pay you 300 gold. This was cheaper for the guild. She gestured for my bronze amulet. I handed it to her and it disappeared into her pocket. I didn't have a say, I asked, but I didn't know how valuable a silver guild rank was either. It also already had the Esenhem bird on it. You still get your gold, Legionnaire. Guildmaster Theodas has purchased your Sahuagin treasures for 76 gold, almost twice what they are worth. You should be leaving for Arteria and then Gramney to carry this guild missive. She placed a scroll on the table. It just details the Sahuagin attack and is more of an excuse for him to pay your way to Gramney. Will it include Maveth and Ginger? I asked, taking the pouch and scroll. Yes, the Goliath and horse are included, she said irritably, probably expecting a thank you. I have half a day before I have to leave. Maybe there are private baths in the city? I said suggestively. Her expression changed to disappointment. Maybe next time we meet, Legionnaire. I need to recruit replacement crew and provision my ship. I have been ordered to sail as soon as possible to retrieve guild negotiators and deliver them to the Tellian capital. Desdemona stood, locked eyes with me for a moment, and said, "Thank you." She then spun and left the guild hall. It felt more like a goodbye than an "I hope to see you again." I waited for Mavaith to return. He smiled, showing off his stamped medallion. He didn't need to see my new silver medallion. "What now, Eric?" "We leave for the Elven capital this evening, but first we find a bathhouse." I patted my friend on the shoulder and led the way out of the guild hall.